It is the promised day. What?
Given that Shadow's characterization in Heroes is still consistent...
Next up is, of course, going to be the long-promised 50,000 subscriber, which is a retrospective on Shadow the Hedgehog.
Oh god, right. Who are you exactly? Someone you will remember in due time. Now, wake up.
Yeah. Okay.
Shadow the Hedgehog, a game I have something of an interesting history with, hence why I decided to save it for a special occasion. I've made no secret of the fact that I sort of dreaded addressing this game after I covered Sonic Heroes, but things aren't always what they seem. Over the course of my creative journey on YouTube, I've evaluated and re-evaluated my feelings on a lot of different things. There's no doubt in my mind that the me who first planned this retrospective in 2021 would not have the same things to say about it that the me of right now plans to. It's complicated, it's messy, but it's much like the rest of this game in that respect. This game is one of the most commonly lambasted, thoroughly mocked, and frequently derided of the entire franchise, and that's a feat unto itself given how picky fans are about their source material. But is that fair? Does it really deserve to be bashed and thrown from the edge that fans conflate it with? Or are there glimmers of light buried within these lurking shadows? We've put off answering that question for far too long. This was supposed to be a 50,000 sub special, and that number has only continued to rise while I've been working on this. Thank you very much. I had some outstanding obligations to wrap up when we first reached this milestone, you see. But I don't intend to make you guys wait any longer. It's true, the promised day is finally here. Let's talk Shadow the Hedgehog. For those just joining the Hedgehog shenanigans here who don't remember what we previously discussed so long ago, allow me to quickly catch you up on the character of Shadow, so that you're not lost about the premise here. Shadow the Hedgehog was initially introduced in 2001's Sonic Adventure 2, a game for the Dreamcast which was made to celebrate the Sonic franchise's 10th anniversary. In that game, Shadow was introduced as an experimental lifeform created 50 years prior to the main story by the grandfather of series antagonist Dr. Eggman, Professor Gerald Robotnik. Gerald was hired by the military to research how to create the ultimate life form, something he was initially hesitant about due to its application as a weapon, but agreed to lead the project due to one thing. That would be his granddaughter, Maria Robotnik, who was suffering from a fatal disorder that weakened her immune system considerably. Hoping that his research might be able to be reverse-engineered to save Maria's life, Gerald agreed to start working for the United Federation, setting up shop on a space colony called the Ark. During this research, he made many failed experiments, such as the artificial chaos and the prototype of the ultimate life form. Eventually, Gerald created his final product, codenamed Project Shadow, which was you-know-who. Unfortunately for Gerald, though, the government had caught wind of some of his deadlier failed experiments, and between this and wanting Shadow for themselves because of the threat he could pose, they devised a cover-up. The military unit of the United Federation, Gun, would raid the Ark and slaughter everyone aboard. Though Gerald was detained beforehand and kept alive, Maria was killed in the incident, which was later covered up as an accident. Maria managed to shoot Shadow out of the Ark in a pod, but he was recovered by Gun and sealed away cryogenically, while Gerald was forced to continue working for them from Prison Island. Losing his mind due to his grief, Gerald devised a plan to alter Shadow's memory, erasing Maria's true final wishes and replacing them with the notion that she wanted revenge on humanity. To this end, Gerald left instructions for Shadow to eventually utilize the Eclipse Cannon located on the Ark to destroy the Earth in retaliation for this loss. With his plan set into motion, Gerald was executed via firing squad. And 50 years later, Shadow would be awoken from his slumber by the man's grandson, Dr. Eggman, who sought his grandfather's research as a means to gain power. Though Shadow would initially appear to cooperate with Eggman's plans for world domination alongside a spy for the government, Rouge the Bat, he would be revealed to have taken advantage of the situation to further his goals for revenge against the Earth. During all of this, he obviously comes into conflict with Sonic, who forms a temporary alliance with Eggman to save the Earth as the space colony hurtles towards its surface. Shadow is eventually reminded of Maria's true wishes, breaking him through his brainwashing when Amy Rose asks him to give humanity a chance, and he has a last-second change of heart, allowing him to join in the fight against the Bio-Lizard with Sonic in his super form. They use the Chaos Emeralds to perform a teleportation ability, Chaos Control, to put the Ark back into stable orbit, preventing its crash, but unable to hold on to his strength for long afterward, Shadow's superform would dissipate. This left him to hurtle down through space to his presumed death, after which everyone mourned and remembered him for who he was. Perhaps flawed and filled with grief, but in the end, a brave and heroic Hedgehog. But who needs a satisfying arc ending? Not Sega. Because while this was planned to initially be Shadow's permanent death, the character was just too darn popular to sleep on when it came to potential profits. Thus came the next mainline Sonic game, Sonic Heroes, which reintroduced the character. This time it was all about mystery. Sonic Heroes' story is relatively simple by comparison to SA2's, and the whole thing's not super relevant to get into. The only thing you need to know is that Shadow was discovered locked in a pod in Eggman's base by Rouge the Bat, and though she was suspicious about how he was suddenly alive, she teamed up with Shadow and a traitorous Eggman mech E123 Omega to take the Doctor down. At the end of Team Dark's storyline, Rouge finds a whole stash of pods with Shadow androids in them, leading her to wonder whether the Shadow she discovered was actually the one she knew, or just a copy of her dead comrade. This mystery was left hanging up in the air at the end of that game, and so obviously, it needed to be resolved somehow, right? At the March 2005 inauguration of Sonic the Hedgehog into the Walk of Game, Sega would reveal how they intended to do so. A reel showed all of the classic Sonic moments from over the years, reminding us of all the joyous memories which got the series recognized by such a huge attraction. Only for all of those memories to be littered with gunshots as Shadow the Hedgehog walked out packing heat. It was an interesting choice for a reveal, to say the very least. Imagine if literally anyone else did something like this for their flagship franchise's Celebration Day.
Today, for Mario's 50th birthday, we decided to publicly execute him.
This game wasn't just born from a need for narrative cohesion, though. It was also born due to a myriad of factors, including, if you can believe it, fan requests. You see, Sega was trying to draw in a bit of an older demographic. Sonic was countercultural when he first debuted, but ever so steadily the brand started to get primarily more popular with children, especially as what was cool began to change and the Sonic characters began to talk. Series director Takashi Iizuka thought it would be a good idea to focus on iterating on the gameplay ideas of a 3D Sonic game, while also adding new elements to draw in older players. This led to a larger focus on combat, primarily with firearms, which Sonic Team thought would be out of character for Sonic to use, but seemed reasonable enough to give to Shadow, since he was a harder edge character.
This wasn't Sonic Team's first rodeo with shooting gameplay, of course. You had Gamma in Sonic Adventure 1, God bless his soul, and the mechs in Sonic Adventure 2. But this was a little bit different.
A lot of the different playstyles in previous Sonic Adventure-like titles had garnered some criticism for deviating from the norm of Sonic a bit too much, slowing down the pace and obstructing players from getting to the meat of what they were there for. For Shadow, the team sought to bridge this gap, creating what they called a gun-action game, which would keep the staple speed of the Sonic series, but seamlessly integrate shooting gameplay into the equation. The story would also take a significantly grimmer turn, particularly with its concepts and art direction.
We use a variety of different mediums to gather inspiration from, but the true ideas, the heart of Shadow, comes from the brilliant minds of our internal art department. I can, however, say that we did reference films like Underworld, Constantine, and even the Terminator series while creating the concept art for Shadow. These movies and more were used to create the image of what we thought Shadow and his world would be.
And honestly, it shows. The colors are grungier, the environments are more dilapidated and melancholic, the designs of the new faction of aliens, the Black Arms, definitely don't evoke the image of goofy cartoon aliens like, say, the Wisps from Sonic Colors, but we'll get back to the Black Arms in a bit. They even got these genuinely awesome-looking CG cutscenes animated by Blur Studio, a studio founded by Tim Miller, who would go on to serve as executive producer for the live-action Sonic movies. A cool loop-around moment for sure, considering he got to bring Shadow to the big screen. There was also a bit more of a focus on violence and even mild swearing. Words like damn and hell are thrown about in Shadow the Hedgehog quite liberally. And while many people would correctly point out that this came across a bit try-hardy, it was still somewhat surreal to hear such obscenities, minor as they may have been, from the mouths of Sonic characters. The game was possibly even going to go harder with this, but Sega got into a bit of a pinch. The swearing and initial use of blood spray from both human and alien enemies originally earned the game an ESRB rating of T for teen, a first for the Sonic series. It seemed Sega was a bit worried that this would limit their sales though, as some voice actors on the project recall recording clean versions of the lines with swearing, which never made it into the final game.
In fact, I'm pretty sure we recorded alternates. So all the dams, I think we did darns.
Really?
Yeah, I think if there was that was questionable and it was like, ooh, should that be in there? They said, let's just do an alternate. So I'm sure somewhere out there there's a bunch of me going, darn it, darn.
Darn, not
Shucks.
You're straight to heck.
What's the worst, I don't remember, what's the worst I say in that game?
You're going straight to hell is a pretty...
No. I got it. This is like taking candy from a baby, which is fine by me.
No, that one they were okay with. They're like, yeah, do that again.
Luckily for Sega, during the time that they were developing the game, a new rating, E10+, for ages 10 and up, was introduced. This allowed them to simply tone down some of the swearing in the blood by removing human blood and making the alien blood green, to squeak by for the new rating, expanding their pool for sales. Somewhat hilariously contrasting the darker turn for the story, however, the voice acting would take a bit of a more lighthearted turn, which has quite a tonal clash to it. And this is because, for the first time, all of the voice cast for the Sonic series would be replaced. Previously, the Adventure cast had worked on the games from 1998 up until the current day, but from here on, the English dub cast would be replaced by the actors who dubbed the Sonic X anime for 4Kids Entertainment. No Chris Thorndike to be found, though. We suffer another day without his presence. This coincided somewhat closely with the unfortunate passing of Dr. Eggman's previous voice actor, Dean Bristow, and seemed to be a move taken to create some brand cohesion. While I definitely did get used to these voices over time, however, I was definitely thrown off by this sudden change as a child who played the Adventure-era games to death. Arguably the biggest focus of the game's development for Sega, though, was a desire to create branching pathways within the story. Yes, multiple routes and endings, but how would Sonic Team achieve something like that for this style of game? Well, this was actually an idea that they wanted to include for Sonic Adventure 2, which could have had extremely grim consequences in that game's story. Unfortunately for our curious brains, that feature never made the cut back then, but it was something that stuck in the team's heads, and thus became a concept they revisited here. Since Shadow was always a character whose morality was a focus of his arc, they really played up this whole angle of deciding whether Shadow was going to be a hero or a villain, a pathway designed by your choices, creating up to 326 unique ways one could complete the game. Sounds ambitious, huh? Yes, well, we know what happens when Sonic Team gets ambitious, though.
Shadow the Hedgehog represents the first of its kind in the Sonic franchise, which means that there will be a lot of different features that players will enjoy. Their favorite will most likely be the fact that the team blended high-speed action with weaponry and vehicles. Additionally, the ability to choose Shadow's path will be a lot of fun.
But it seemed consumers were a bit mixed on those results. Shadow the Hedgehog was released on November 15, 2005 on the Nintendo GameCube, PlayStation 2, and the original Xbox. And while the game sold relatively well with consumers, critics absolutely trashed the game, calling it painfully dumb, ill-advised, laughable, extremely frustrating, poorly designed, and even a betrayal to longtime fans. They weren't the only ones with mixed feelings either.
Would you believe me if I said Shadow the Hedgehog was the first game I ever pre-ordered?
Yeah, when people asked who wanted this game, apparently I did. I was a little one when this dropped, and I was hyped to hell and back for it. I saw that Walk of Game trailer, and for some reason, instead of being befuddled, I was excited. I begged my parents for it, and lo and behold, they agreed. On the night that the game released, I was in some church group thing of all places, and my mom arrived to pick me up just a bit early, with a brand new copy of the game on Xbox in hand, ready for me to play. I got home and tore that sucker open as fast as I could, and
I got a beanie as a pre-order bonus, by the way. That's it. It didn't come with anything else. $60 well spent.
Anyway, I played the game right away, and well, like hoped. I tried really hard to convince myself that I liked it, and generally speaking, it's not like I hated everything about it, but something was clear, even from the beginning. Something was off about this game, and I was not having as much fun as I did with the adventure titles, or even Sonic Heroes. This looking back was probably a formative memory for me. You see, when you're a kid, you don't really think about whether a game you're playing is bad, because there's a part of you that just assumes, or at least there was for me, that you're just not good at it. You're the problem, not the game. But this was the first time I ever really found myself disappointed with the game, and not really thinking that I was the problem. But it's also been a very long time since I've played this game for any extended period. Truth be told, as a child, I never even actually finished the game, as the branching pathway system kinda confused me. More on that in a bit. So this is actually going to be the first time I ever complete it personally. This is a very big chapter of my life that I guess I need to close, so let's do it in style, and maybe discover whether or not the game really is as bad as everyone says it is along the way. Who knows, maybe it will be better than I remembered, and than people wanted to give it credit for.
Or, you know, even if it's bad, it'll still probably be funny.
Let's retread those same familiar streets. Let's pack heat. Let's play Shadow the Hedgehog already, damn it.
I see no fear, no evil. Black writings on the wall. Unleashed a million faces.
And one by one they fall. Black-hearted evil, brave-hearted hero. I am all I am, all I am. I am.
Here we go, buddy, here we go, buddy, here we go, here we go, buddy, here we go.
Go ahead and try to see through me. Do it if you dare. One step forward, two step back out.
One step forward, two steps back.
Do it, do it, do it, do it. Can you see all of me? Walk into my mystery. Step inside and hold on for dear life. Do you remember me? Capture you, set you free. I am all of me. I am.
The story begins one way, no matter which winding road it takes. Shadow the Hedgehog stands near the city of Westopolis, a newspaper flying by talking about an upcoming festival to celebrate the passing of the Black Comet. Shadow doesn't really remember much about himself right now, not his past, not his present, not his character arc, not even his night of passion with Sonic in Central City. Just his name and a traumatic memory, the death of Maria Robotnik at the hands of Gun. Before he can ponder that further though, the skies darken, and aliens show up.
Oh, is that all?
Shadow, I need you to pick me up some 4-cheese blend. Only Sargento, though. I don't like any other brands.
What? Who are you? And what's wrong with Borden?
I go by many names, but you can call me Father.
That's very strange. But I don't know my father, so I guess there's no choice.
Yeah, that's true.
These aliens are the Black Arms, and we'll be learning more about them soon. Shadow doesn't seem all that interested in helping humanity with their invasion problem, but just then, the leader of the aliens, Black Doom, arrives out of nowhere to inform Shadow that he apparently has to fulfill a promise to give him the Chaos Emeralds. Confused and with no leads on where to go or what to do, Shadow decides to follow the aliens into the city, hoping they may know something about him. And Shadow the Hedgehog begins. Let's just rip off the Band-Aid now. To get to the true ending of the game, you'll have to play it 10 times through. Yeah, you heard me. Each route takes around 2 to 3 hours-ish, so that's not too terribly long, but if you suspect this might get tedious, then yes. But only if you're not a masochist. Thankfully, I was recently registered. Each route consists of 6 stages at any given time, with 22 in total. You'll proceed in different directions based on what mission you do for each respective level. While some only have 2, a majority of stages have 3. There's the Hero Mission, where you help Sonic or his friends, the Dark Mission, where you help Black Doom or occasionally Dr. Eggman, and there's the Neutral Mission, where you focus on nobody but yourself and head to the goal ring. Neutral is a little milquetoast for my tastes, though, so we're going to call it what it is, the centrist path from now on. Each run always starts here, Westopolis. So let's look through our options. For the Hero Mission, we encounter who else but Sonic. A Sonic who asks no questions, for that matter. Methinks he might be taking the "it doesn't matter" mantra a bit too far. He wants us to help clear the city of the aliens, which means hunting down every single enemy in allegiance with the big BA. There are 45 of them. Oh god, okay, that's a little too much work for my proto-zoomer brain. How much does it take to be evil? Well, Black Doom is here to relay his mission via use of a floating peeper called the Doom's Eye, which I gotta admit, looks pretty sick. And he wants us to eliminate all of the gun soldiers. There are 35 of those.
You know, neither of you are doing a great job of selling me here.
Did they not say that they wanted to integrate the speed of a Sonic game and the action of a gunning game together? Because as it stands, I could start a family and pay off my credit card debt before I reach top speed, and I'd run past my mission objectives if I did. That is, of course, unless I go for the centrist mission, which only requires me to get to the goal ring at the end of the stage. That sounds more like a Sonic game to me, so that's obviously what I went for first. Before we touch on how that goes, though, let's talk about how the game actually plays. For starters, we'll begin with a positive. One of the biggest focuses of the gameplay here was obviously the weaponry, and to its credit, the gunplay is surprisingly solid. The game has a pretty decent auto-aim instead of requiring you to fuss around with a reticle. It does occasionally target the wrong enemy if you're in the middle of a cluster of them, and that can be kind of annoying, but for the most part, it's reliable. This is pretty much the thing to get right if they were going to focus on anything, so it's good that they nailed this decently well. What kind of suffers, however, is, well, basically everything else. Shadow's acceleration, for starters, is incredibly slippery, even more so than in Sonic Heroes. I suspect this may be to compensate for the broader and more labyrinthine level design, but it just tends to hinder me more than it helps. I can't count how many times I've careened off of platforms or slammed into enemies when just trying to move normally, which is a complaint I've heard about other 3D Sonic games that came before this, but rarely sincerely encountered myself until now. This means, as some have pointed out, that it's actually safer at times to carefully proceed at a more measured pace, but this definitely seems to shoot the design ethos of a Sonic title in the foot. And before anyone says that this game shouldn't be looked at as a Sonic game, I think that if that were the case, they should have deviated further, rather than retaining most core elements like rings, loop-de-loops, dash pads, and etc. Shadow also has different methods of attack than firearms. Firstly, to add to the weapon pool, there are many different environmental items that you can pick up, like road signs, torches, or light stands, similar to other sword or staff-like weapons that you can get from enemies. These work decently well, but they're pretty flimsy, having a limited number of hits before they break, similar to a gun's ammo. They also don't really differ from each other all that significantly in application. While you could say this about a lot of guns too, they at least have some variety in terms of blast radius, strength, and that kind of thing. There are standard punches and kicks for when you're without a weapon, and they're very short range, but don't really do much good. The spin dash has returned, but its usefulness falls even below the rocket excel from Heroes now in my opinion. Nowhere near as seamless to use as in the adventure games. And of course, your standard homing attack as well. It's a bit slow and has a tendency to not target as well if you don't wait till the peak of your jump, but it's still okay. It just takes longer to get anywhere with it, as its strength has been reduced to accommodate both for enemies having life bars and weapons being prioritized. Shadow also retains the triangle jump from Heroes, allowing him to cling to walls and run along them for a short distance. If you stay still or don't switch walls quickly enough though, he'll fall. So you have to treat this very precisely when above pits or hazards, for example. Lastly, you have two gauges at the top of the screen. You can fill your red gauge by accumulating dark energy, which can be gained by doing property damage or killing hero-aligned allies like the gun soldiers. Building this gauge all the way allows you to use Chaos Blast, a wide radius screen nuke which usually takes out all surrounding enemies. This can be somewhat helpful if you're surrounded by a bunch of them or need to take out a chunk of a boss's health. Similarly, you can build your hero gauge, the blue one, by doing good things like putting out fires, rescuing kittens from trees, or actually it's mostly just killing the black arms. With a full hero gauge, you can use Chaos Control, which allows you to zip through the stage at an alarmingly fast rate, effectively letting the game play itself for a while. I don't really mind Chaos Blast in concept, but Chaos Control, I'm not really sure what the thinking was for this one. At best, the reward is playing less of the game,
which is fine by me.
And most of the time it doesn't even really work with the stage design. Unless you're gonna go for the centrist mission, you probably aren't gonna want to use Chaos Control, as it will take you past your mission objectives and risk launching you into the goal ring, meaning you would complete the wrong path if you were aiming for hero or dark. At the very least, building up either gauge does allow you to have infinite ammo while it gradually ticks down, so if you don't use your chaos power, you can take advantage of that instead. In some ways, this is often more useful than just using your special. Speaking of missing mission objectives, I should mention that there are checkpoints which also act as teleportation pads back to previous ones you've touched. This should ideally act as a way to help comb through enemies or items that you've missed for a particular objective, but in practice, it can only really do so much, as these levels basically never have maps to speak of, so it's just guesswork. I've gone through a lot of gameplay elements, but we can touch on the lingering few we haven't yet when they become more relevant. For now, let's get back to the action. Westopolis, for an intro stage, is pretty alright in my opinion. By virtue of revisiting it so many times, it does start to get old, but it is an immediate and striking contrast to, say, something like City Escape, For this to be the first impression of the game definitely says something about it. Grungy and dark streets littered with cracks as striking beams hurtle down from the sky. Gun soldiers cry out in fear, and the sky swirls a sickly dark red.
Mr. Yuji Naka is all right!
Is he? In casting aside Sonic and Doom both here, it really sets a tone going forward of forging ahead completely on your own. And this is very dour. It definitely filled me with a bit of unease as a kid, much like the menus did. Actually, can I talk about the menus for a second? These are cheesy as hell, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't love them. The banged up looking font, the rolling mist and fire, the goofy ass gunshot noises for literally every selection you make, it is all peak. I'm also a big fan of the inquisitive scrolling text in the background. Sure, it's horribly translated English, which talks about Shadow destroying the Nermies, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean, but it's kind of haunting either way. I always thought this seemed like a remnant of Maria's words, twisting around in Shadow's mind as he tries to remember just what's true. The way it lingers as a barely legible imprint in the background constantly feels like it's stirring around in his brain, a bit out of reach, but paradoxically never far. It kind of reminds me a lot of survival horror games from this console generation, which then makes me think this was like Sonic Team's attempt at something more tonally akin to Silent Hill or Rule of Rose. And those are words I did not expect to say today. Gameplay-wise, Westopolis is alright. The missions are pretty tedious, and taking the centrist route, while much easier, is bound to clue you into the conflicts and how Shadow stages are designed. Trying to run through these stages like your typical Sonic game just doesn't work, and there are constantly things getting in your way or slowing you down on account of the fact that the game wants you to engage with them for one of the other missions. Areas are much wider, more filled with stuff, and a lot of that stuff will be enemies, which are incredibly easy to run into given your slippery controls. I don't think the marriage of speed and gunning was accomplished at the start here. It more closely resembles the tenuous relationship between oil and water. To go fast, you have several instances of stopping dead in your tracks to deal with something else. Sonic games have never been without this, but it is far more of a stark contrast here. But by completing the centrist path of the stage, we've collected 2 Chaos Emeralds, one during the stage and one at the end, and can now move on in the story. We see a commander at Gun vowing revenge on Shadow for some perceived misdeed, apparently still not believing in his innocence, as a supporting officer reports to him, and then we cut back to Shadow himself. Black Doom isn't really happy with us for ignoring him and says something about how Professor Gerald must have done more to his memory than he first realized. Shadow is intrigued by the mention of the professor, but for his disobedience he is warped to a strange canyon with temple ruins. This is the second stage of the centrist route, Glyphic Canyon, and the objectives are as follows. You can decide to start aligning with Doom and activate 5 jewels to awaken the temple, you can help Knuckles the Echidna to defeat 60 Black Arms troops, or you can head to the goal ring as usual. This stage's visual identity is at its most interesting within the temples, as they're lit by the swirling sunlight green jewels which coat the walls in their unearthly glow. Everything else is just kind of dusty or brown looking, and though some of the architecture is pretty interesting, the color palette makes it all seem a bit drab. The music is low-key, but fitting, feeling like a descent into some eerie ancient structure, underscoring how long the journey ahead still is. You're constantly beset by tornadoes, similar to Sonic Adventure's Windy Valley, which is a nice touch. The enemy variety increases here with the introduction of weird spore-like aliens and giant dune worms which shoot lasers at you?
No comment.
But otherwise, this stage is pretty straightforward. When not accounting for the larger enemy count of the hero mission, I'd say the stage is a bit easier to navigate than Westopolis, which makes it a bit less of a drag on a centrist run-through. This is probably due to the fact that there are many more areas you can just run through linearly, and the wider areas are either easier to slip through or otherwise are cordoned off a bit more. This is both a positive and a negative, however, as I still don't feel like the game's design goals are being struck here. This isn't accounting for the difficulties of integrating these concepts so much as it is separating them almost entirely and slapping them next to each other. You can get whichever you want out of it, but there's no healthy marriage, only the parent you decide to see on the weekends. Anywho, another emerald down, what happens next? First, we see the President of the United Federation, who I maintain looks like a gym fusion between Reagan and JFK, and he declares the nation will never surrender to terrorists. Then he muses about how the world was once saved by Sonic and Shadow and how they all need to protect that peace no matter the cost. Yeah, where did he get this picture? This coincides with Shadow's arrival to the third stage, Prison Island. We've been here before. It was featured in Sonic Adventure 2 after all. And even Shadow seems to vaguely remember being put in stasis here by Gun. It looks different though, and I gotta say, this is probably one of my favorite stages aesthetically. Unlike the nostalgia bait retreads of many past Sonic levels and newer titles, this stage actually takes advantage of its narrative evolution from said previous games. If you'll recall, Prison Island was blown up by Eggman in Sonic Adventure 2, but this place is actually messed up, unlike the other place he destroyed in that game. This has left it completely abandoned, running with rivers of radioactive waste. I'm gonna need a Geiger counter here. It's also filled with these overgrowths of moss and other vegetation, reminiscent of how it's smack dab in the middle of a forest, and how it's been left to nature since its destruction. Aliens and soldiers alike roam around. Panels of steel can launch you to further areas, iron bars and cells litter each building structure you come across, and flying saucer devices can help you cross the rivers of sludge beneath your feet. In the mission, you can either proceed to the end for a Chaos Emerald as usual, or you can help one of two parties. In the hero corner, you have Charmy B of the Chaotix Detective Agency, requesting you find 5 top secret discs that he's looking for on command from Vector. Keep that in mind for later. Or you can join the Black Arms to eliminate 40 gun robots, as it seems this place is so dangerous that human troops won't even come. The music is discordant, but still surprisingly well synced, a mellow guitar ripping away alongside frantic piano hits. It perfectly encapsulates the feeling of coming back to something familiar, but finding it different and in disrepair. Again, the Centrist mission doesn't quite feel straightforward enough to work as a standard Sonic stage, but by this point you've either decided to stop playing if you hate it, or settled into the game's odd groove. And if you've reached that stage of Shadow Syndrome, I think you can find at least something to like here. The stop and go method occasionally starts to feel like a rhythm of its own, supplemented by the decently well-handled combat. Contending with mech enemies in particular, which are well combated both by homing attacks and especially the increasingly bigger weapons you can acquire from them, is satisfying and lends the fighting a sense of mounting scale, which can be cathartic to rise through. Overall, a decent stage, but there's no way I'm wasting what little space in my brain I have left to get those top secret discs. Sorry, Charmy. Guess who else is here, by the way? Finally, it's Dr. Eggman, with his current voice actor, Mike Pollock, making his voice debut in a game as well. He's pretty pissed that the aliens are destroying the world he plans to conquer, and that the military's doing a pretty piss-poor job of pushing them back. So he's decided to enter the fight as a third party, an independent, if you will. And I think that's genuinely pretty cool. Having Eggman be less of a reluctant ally and more so working for his own interests definitely fits his character, and while I don't think the former didn't, it's still a cool angle to take. I think this is about the time to admit that this game could get kind of narratively messy with how it's arranged, though, as the introductory scene for the next stage has Black Doom explaining to Shadow about his 2,000-year-old armada, the Flying Ruins, which are now activated from Glyphic Canyon. He seems to be talking to Shadow like they're working together, but I haven't worked with him a single step of the way, so this is weird. Why does his ass still think I'm going to do what he says? Was he not listening? Is he stupid?
Shadow, my Game Boy Advance died and my flip phone doesn't get service out here. I demand you play sorry with me.
Sorry? There's no way I'm going to make myself a willing victim for you.
My way is epic and beast mode. On the Black Comet, we play with house rules. When you're bumped off the board, you're exiled from the meteor and left to die. I fucked it up. Exiled from the meteor and left to suffocate and die in the dark void of space.
If you're going to be that cruel, you may as well play Monopoly.
No. Takes too long.
The stage that follows, Sky Troops, is probably one of the most memorable to a lot of people, and I can definitely see why. Setup-wise, it's cool as hell. You're on giant floating ruins in the sky as two factions battle it out and you're caught in the middle. You have the opportunity to pilot a gun hopper vehicle or man giant alien cannons. Heck, you can even ride one of the flying aliens through a storm cloud as the sky grows dark and bellows with thunder. The music is one of the most popular on the soundtrack, a soaring, almost majestic sounding piece which sells the grandeur of what you're beholding. Shadow twists and turns through the open air and ponders to himself if he's seen this blue sky from afar before, calling to mind either his time spent staring out the observation windows on the Ark, or the several he's spent hurtling through Earth's atmosphere. That all said though, I think this stage could have used even more expansion to reach greater heights. The battle is two-sided after all, and you help Eggman for the hero mission, destroying the temple's jewels to sink the armada. But you spend all of your time in the stage simply darting back and forth between said temples, which look basically identical to how they did in Glyphic Canyon. The visual identity is spruced up somewhat by the contrasting sky and the storm cloud section, but I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity not to let you revisit Eggman's battleships as seen in Sonic Heroes on foot, as this would not only have made the level's identity stand a bit stronger in its contrast, but would invoke that memory even more. Maybe this was just a hardware limitation, though. As for the other missions, you can obviously help Doom and destroy 5 of Eggman's battleships, or you can dart to the end to find Eggman's flagship and follow him for the Centrist mission. I'm definitely starting to get a bit more into the game's groove by this point, but not to spout blasphemy, I just find this one a little boring outside of its concept. The music is a banger, for sure, but the reused aesthetics just don't really do much for me, especially when I already was pretty meh on Glyphic Canyon itself. This would also probably be a good time to mention that the vehicles also do little for me. The gun hopper is okay, jumping high is fun and all, but it's painfully slow on the ground, and its hover is so sluggish it's barely worth using. You'll need this one to clear long jumps that you couldn't otherwise, but most others aren't really worth writing home about, as Shadow's basic movement speed regularly clears them, and their clunky controls are so imprecise and prone to getting you into danger that you might as well just stick to the ground. The mandatory flying section on the back of an alien is fine, but it almost has the opposite issue, being so loose that it's easy to run face first into hazards if you're not being careful. Overall, it's not a terrible stage, but if it weren't for the music, I don't think Sky Troops would be so high on a lot of people's lists. So anyway, are you ready to get crazy? Because I think it's time to get crazy. Shadow arrives at Iron Jungle, which is on the way to one of Eggman's bases. Here, Shadow learns about the mass-produced androids of himself we saw back in Heroes, and he has a veritable freak-out about it because, well, yeah. He obviously starts to wonder if he's actually the original or just a copy like them. And I'll comment more on what I think about this little plot thread as we near the end of the route. For now, though, we've got to pursue Eggman himself into the jungle. This level actually does take place on some of the architecture from Eggman's fleets, which is a refreshing change of pace. The way the greenery of the jungle juxtaposes how we last saw these ships in the open air is pretty cool. I will say that the architecture seems a lot narrower than in Heroes, but that may be due to the fact that there's less of it to go around and we're not hopping around in the air. The music is pretty okay, but it doesn't really do a lot for me, admittedly. Decently selling the feeling of a descent into the jungle and an ongoing fight, but little else. This is fair though, because most of the proceedings are combat-oriented, with areas being locked off by either egg pawns or shadow androids. It's a little funny, I must admit, to see Shadow so disturbed by the android's resemblance to himself when they have to be so low poly comparatively due to hardware limitations, but I can suspend my disbelief a little bit here. The missions are basically the reverse of the last stage, with the Dark mission being to destroy 28 gun robots for Eggman, and the Hero mission being to shoot down Eggman's fleet with Omega, who even openly ponders whether Shadow is the original, though he ultimately doesn't really care if we help him on his mission either way. We're not going to do that, though, as the Centrist mission is once again to simply reach the end. More than almost any other stage so far, the combat sections are making it pretty clear that this isn't a level that's meant to just be run through. And overall, it doesn't really make much of an impression on me, which is a shame. The sights are decent, but it's like getting an economy seat by the window on a cheap flight. No food or movies? I'm out of here. Even if we didn't help Omega, we'll proceed with him to our first boss fight, that being against the Egg Breaker. Shadow asks Eggman if he's one of the androids, and Eggman says that he is, but will be destroyed alongside Omega due to his disobedience. The Egg Breaker is pretty similar in appearance to the Egg Emperor from Sonic Heroes, only it's red and blue instead of gold, because it's lame. It also has a spike ball for a hand. Basically, all you have to do here is run around, avoid enemies, and shoot from either turrets or descending rockets at the center platform where he stands. After taking enough damage, he'll jump off to start leaping at you and creating shockwaves, where you'll have to put a bit of distance between you while shooting at him. He goes down pretty easy, at which point you'll pursue him into the final stage of this route, Lava Shelter. Finally, Shadow the Hedgehog is starting to coalesce in two ways. The first is story-wise, as with the 5th Chaos Emerald, he's come to remember his death from Sonic Adventure 2. Convinced of his identity as an android, and of the original Shadow's ultimate demise, Shadow decides to pursue Eggman to punish him, declaring that he will make him regret ever creating him.
It goes kind of hard, not gonna lie.
The second way Shadow coalesces is, not even kidding, it's gameplay. For my money, Lava Shelter is the platonic ideal of Shadow stages in how it's designed. You seek Eggman throughout the cavernous base, littered with screens, grind rails, and strips of metal. Glowing red light surrounds you on all sides as the heat smolders and bubbles below, and giant reactors bearing Eggman's symbol whir and wail as you proceed past. Pawns litter the strips, and Shadow androids become more and more prominent, emphasizing the fight within Shadow to reckon with his own identity. The missions are also perfectly handled. There are only 2 paths now, Hero and Dark, with each leading to a slightly different ending. For the Hero mission, you can accompany Omega to reach the goal ring and locate Eggman, or you can activate Eggman's volcanic defense systems to keep Gun out, effectively keeping the confrontation all to yourself. If you pursue the former, you'll work through the lower tunnels of the base, dogging it to the end as you stave off hordes of enemies and keep your precarious balance on intricate loops of rails. If you decide to go for the latter, however, you get something totally unlike any other stage so far. Activating the volcanic defenses raises the level of the magma, and provides you platforms to go to the upper areas. This essentially means that for the alternate route, you're being funneled toward an entirely different previously inaccessible portion of the stage, which is also more precarious to navigate. This is awesome. It finally feels like the ideas the game was founded on are being realized. The game is changing according to your playstyle, and rewarding you with more content, and it all still feels relatively Sonic-y no matter which way you go. There's no annoying missions requiring you to destroy 60 enemies, it's activating generators that you'd pass by either way, hardly interrupting the flow of gameplay while also playing rather seamlessly into the greater combat focus, affording meaningful forks in the road that reflect your choices. To top it all off, the music is kick-ass. It is easily one of my favorite tracks in the whole game. The slick guitar riffs embody the heat and intensity of the setting, as well as Shadow's single-minded fixation on finding and squeezing the truth out of Eggman by force, a return to the flames he feels molded by, and an acceptance of that destructive purpose at the expense of his master. It is an excellent final stage, which honestly deserved a way better final boss. At the end of the road, we come face to face with another Eggman robot, the Egg Dealer. Shadow and Omega have their sights set to destroy Eggman once and for all, with Shadow even saying he's going to send Eggman straight to hell.
Alright, settle down there, buddy. There's no need to do this. Your family loves you.
And the fight begins. The Egg Dealer is basically just a giant wheeling slot machine with a gambling theme. Sonic games are no stranger to this, just look at any casino stage in the series past. But it feels a little out of place here. What's also out of place is how this thing works, effectively having slots which work to both Eggman's and your advantage. In gameplay, this makes sense, you've got to beat the boss somehow. Story-wise though, why did he do this?
What suddenly spurred his crippling gambling addiction back to the forefront of his inventions?
I know 90% of gamblers stop before hitting it big, but come on. It also uses his own weapons against him if you're the one to hit the third slot button, so I truly have no idea. Oh yeah, there's also a combo which gives you a full dark gauge to use Chaos Blast.
No, not Shadow Fever!
My brother in Christ, you made the machine.
Deal enough damage and he's down, and thus comes the ending.
Don't you ever f***ing call me that ever again, I'll kill you!
If I kill you first.
In the hero variant, Shadow declares his intention to take over Eggman's empire as leader of the android uprising. Omega locks his targets on Eggman, and Shadow karate chops him to death?
Honestly pretty based. I for one welcome our new Hedgehog android overlord.
In the Dark variant, Shadow doesn't have Omega along anymore and simply declares that with the power of the Emeralds, he'll be stronger than the original Shadow, and then he karate chops Eggman to death. You know, I feel like those weren't terribly different. Yeah, keep in mind that these count for 2 of the mandatory 10 playthroughs. To get to the other ending you didn't choose, you'll have to replay through all of the levels I just talked about, or something that at least gets you to the same last stage if you don't want to go in that sequence, and then you'll have to pick the alternate mission to get the marginally different ending. That kind of, sucks. I realize it was probably to incentivize replay value and ensure that no one route was too long, but yeesh. As an ending, this is a mixed bag for me. I know a lot of people clown on the Shadow Android thing because they think it's silly for Shadow to seriously believe he's a robot, but it doesn't really bother me personally. I can't lie to you and say that Shadow the Hedgehog doesn't use some of its 2005-isms poorly, and that it doesn't go over the top while sharpening that edge, but to that very point, I don't think this is half bad conceptually. Shadow has amnesia right now, so it's not unreasonable to me for him to come to this conclusion based on what he's learned in this route. It's kind of Eggman's fault, since he literally gaslit him into thinking that he was an android, that things turned out this way. And honestly, part of me thinks that Shadow actually being an android would have been pretty cool. The struggle of inheriting an identity that you didn't ask for, the trauma and aspirations of a dead man, and being constantly tormented both by his history and his memory, torn between factions that beg for an allegiance you were never sworn to. It's no wonder that Shadow would choose to cast himself outside of the whole conflict and take this path down the middle in staunch rejection of himself. If being Shadow cannot be unique, then why live in that shadow at all? This doesn't mean it's anywhere close to perfect, though. For starters, there's the fact that, as many people have already pointed out, the game's structure makes the story a jumbled mess through some poor attention to detail. If you play any of this in a non-linear sequence, scenes will bounce around with scenes from other routes incoherently, and a select few of these scenes, which play no matter the route, have no meaningful follow-up in endings like this. Remember the gun commander from the beginning, the one who had a grudge against Shadow? Do you think I skipped a scene explaining that somewhere? Because I didn't. It never comes back up in this route. And that easily makes this story's tenuous grasp on continuity start to feel even more threadbare. If the game itself can't bother to care about its own plot beats, that inspires me as a player to similarly check out, and that's a shame. As a standalone narrative among many others, this could have certainly worked given enough time and consideration. Something Sega isn't known for being too generous towards handing out. Speaking of consideration, the dark ending variant is also lame. The idea of Shadow stopping Gun's advance so he can fight Eggman alone is fine enough, but the ending is barely different and so largely inconclusive that it doesn't feel worth an entirely new playthrough to get to it. If the final turn is to suddenly side with Eggman, why can't we actually side with Eggman, since he's one of the factions at play here? We could have easily had an ending where Shadow decides to become like one of Eggman's commanding officers, a right hand that heads the androids as an elite squad in a bid for world domination and theme park construction. I'm sure Shadow could have done a great job managing the several lawsuits and broken legs for the rides he designed at Eggman Land. Sure, it sounds a little out there, but wasn't half the proposed fun of these alternate endings supposed to come from making Shadow's fate change due to the justifications in his mind as he makes choices throughout the game? If you planted the seeds ahead of time, it would add to the variety of places our anti-hero could end up in, and make Lava Shelter's climax feel that much more earned, even if it's not the truth. At the very least, the ending theme, Waking Up by Julian K, is the exact mid-aughts shot in the arm one needs after taking decisive action. It's a mix of electronic and industrial rock, blending the soundscape of machinery together with heavy rock, which just defines Shadow. As a creation, an artificial existence mired in chaos and grief. The lyrics opine this freedom of tearing away of all the things that previously defined you, shedding all of that weight and casting aside those who would offer you false answers of who you are, revolving around their own interests. For such a lyrically heavy declaration, it is musically upbeat and the vocals are phenomenally good. Low-key and restrained one moment, guttural and passionate the next. It's no surprise that the guys behind This Machine from Sonic Heroes could turn out another masterstroke, but damn, did they ever. It works perfectly for this set of endings, and considering that most people playing this game will only ever reach one of those two, this is a good musical note to go out on. By the end of Shadow's centrism, his namesake title has cemented itself as having big ideas but sloppy execution, struggling much like its titular hero with the crisis of identity, that it maybe doesn't resolve in the best of ways. As it stands alone, the game's disparate elements do not really coalesce into something I feel is worth calling unequivocally good, and it has more than its fair share of factors dragging it down. But there are slivers of potential shining through the cracks in its allegedly android body nonetheless. I'm convinced that the foundation isn't inherently bad, just uneven. There's enough to draw me towards the other possibilities I can explore. Given everything people rant about with it, for now, I'm willing to accept good enough. But what happens if you're an absolute bastard?
Well, your mom will probably be very disappointed in you.
The story begins one way, no matter which winding road it takes. Shadow the Hedgehog, no memories, big scary dream, aliens, Westopolis. Let's take up old Black Doom on his offer and kill all the gun soldiers. Wow, this is remarkably tedious. It's easy to miss them too, so I'm already backtracking a bit. Doesn't take that long, but it's still annoying.
You know what they say, the quickest way to hell is by spin dashing into military dogs like bowling pins. They'll be joining us there soon anyway.
After seeing the same scene of the commander from last time, we're on to different pastures. Not greener, just different. Black Doom is pleased with our obedience after Shadow does some slow-motion mid-air kung fu on some gun soldiers and sends us to infiltrate and disrupt the UF's mainframe. Oh, so we're gonna hack into a computer? Well, yes, but probably not how you're expecting. The following stage, Digital Circuit, literally takes place inside the mainframe itself. Black Doom calls this place cyberspace, no relation to the one from Sonic Frontiers, I'm assuming. And while I would certainly like to know how Shadow wormed his physical form into the government's big Windows XP machine, I don't think I'm gonna get many answers beyond, I don't know, looks cool though, right? Yeah, it kinda does.
Shadow, I took all of the world's RAM and transplanted it into my own supercomputer. I can travel through digital worlds, edit WikiLeaks files, and watch the annoying orange in 16K.
That's outrageous.
But it's true. Even Tobuscus sounds like a very unpleasant dream, which are the only kind that I find pleasure in.
Dare I ask what else you find pleasure in?
You dare.
Fine. Tell me your secrets.
In due time. after I force Anthony to win every food battle.
This place is very much the 2000s platonic ideal of computer-themed stages. There are circuits and wires everywhere, harsh neon colors, blocks, literal firewalls, and the antivirus programs have guns and try to kill you with them. The defenses are apparently programs replicating guns tech, which is fine enough to suspend my disbelief for, but also Black Doom's forces are here somehow. I don't claim to understand this. For the missions, you have only a hero and a dark path this time. If you want to course correct for good, you can help out Rouge the Bat get to the goal ring and find the Chaos Emerald. Or, if you want to continue your amnesia-inspired dark descent, you can help Black Doom destroy the core program at the center of the mainframe. We're going to aim for the latter here. This stage honestly isn't that bad, since its goals both accommodate gunning to a specific location. It's just that the dark path is slightly longer. Combat sections are fairly well integrated into the playground design, and hallways remain relatively easy to navigate, if not a bit frustrating when the firewall panels get in the way. The colors really make this place pop, and the music is almost a playfully warbling set of beeps and blips, which do sound a bit like what it would be like to inhabit this kind of space. If I had a big complaint, it's that the bottomless pits are just a bit too plentiful, and that combined with the rudimentary shape-like pathing, can make it feel a bit blocky and slow-paced, even despite its more accommodatingly linear paths. At the end, we make it to this big tower with a glowy orb in the center, which I guess represents the core program. Sure, that's all well and good. And we shoot it with our big computerized guns. Why am I trying to take this game seriously? And destroy it, successfully completing our second dark mission. Exiting the computer world, we make it out to a terminal belonging to one Dr. Eggman. Shadow spots Eggman, or, as he calls him, Eggman.
Dr. Eggman?
Why did he suddenly develop an accent? Shadow decides that perhaps the Doctor will know more about his past than the Black Arms will. Thus, we pursue Robotnik through the third stage, Cryptic Castle. This stage's aesthetic is absolutely on point, reminiscent of the Haunted Mansion levels from Sonic Heroes, but this place is more warmly lit, suspended on cracking stone architecture with pointy towers, ghastly flickering blue flames, giant jack-o'-lanterns, and patchwork skeleton faces. It's like you're running through the Sonic stage equivalent of the Nightmare Before Christmas's Halloween Town, and I can't get enough of it. I wish the guitar riff and the music here played more into the theme, but the other droning, eerie sounds underscoring it do well enough to sell it, even if I don't think it's one of the best tracks in the OST. We have 3 potential missions to take on here. A centrist mission where we get to the goal ring, a hero mission where we help Amy Rose locate Cream the Rabbit and her Chow Cheese, who are trapped somewhere in the castle, or we can ignore literal missing children and do the dark mission, which is to help Eggman light 5 giant lanterns to activate his castle's defenses. Somehow.
Look, big flames? Pretty scary. I wouldn't want to screw with them either. Oh no, George!
This stage definitely gets a bit more labyrinthian in how it's designed, and tracking down all of the lanterns can be irksome when you have to make sure you're on the right path to find one. Finding Cream and Cheese by comparison is incredibly easy, which is too bad because I never saved them on any of my playthroughs. The linear shot through is also simple enough, but it feels more cumbersome due to the level structure. The theme may be spot on, but this is no lava shelter. This is also where we see some of the cracks in the game's story structure again, because literally no matter which mission you do, you'll end the stage having to fight the Eggbreaker as a boss, with Amy tagging along. You know, if I had actually done the hero mission and helped her friends, this would make sense, but considering that I just went around lighting fire pits and internally screaming at starving children to shut up—
Shut up! Shut up, children!
I feel like Amy shouldn't be here cheering me on. I mean, I basically ran right past her while she was asking me for help and ignored her requests, so I have no idea why she would still be on my side at this point. This kind of underscores a larger issue with how the companion characters work in general, honestly. No matter which allegiance you're working for, enemies of that allegiance will still attack you. And hell, sometimes it will actually be mandatory to kill them for stage progression. But if you attack back, you'll get whatever member of said allegiance yammering in your ear about how you need to stop. This is actually especially hilarious when taking this stage into account, as the Black Arms are always evil aligned by default, despite the fact that Eggman is the one who you work for here to complete the dark objective. This means that if you're tagging along with Amy, she'll scold you for destroying Eggman's robots, even though she should have no problem with that, simply because the only other enemy type in the stage is the aliens, and, well, the game can't account for both of those things at the same time with how its missions work. This leads to the incredible conclusion where, during the Eggbreaker boss fight, you'll have Amy tagging along with you, even without doing her mission, and while she cheers you on to destroy Eggman's big mech, she'll also yell at you for destroying the egg pawns which are deployed around the arena. Makes a lot of sense. Except for how much sense it never makes, which is even more sense, but also less. You get it, right? Guess it's a good thing she doesn't continue following the Dark Squad, though, because I doubt it would be very in character for Amy to keep rooting for us after this. Pretty much abandoning the thought of interrogating Eggman after he tried to kill Shadow for wanting to take his Chaos Emerald, our Prince of Darkness returns to the side of Doom to invade Central City, something that sends a shock to the President's system. As an army of aliens stand at his back, Doom goads Shadow by telling him that his relationship with humanity has been nothing but an exchange of hatred, of them trying in their fear to restrain and destroy him. Confused, hurt, and malleable, Shadow believes his words without much protest, and thus begins a path we won't so easily be able to come back from. Central City is the fourth stage and a pivotal turning point in this route's narrative. With the bustling metropolis being a primary target for the alien forces, Doom sends us to set off a giant bomb that will cause untold destruction and death. To do this, we have to detonate 5 large bombs. If we want to make a swerve before we get in too deep, we can also accompany Knuckles to dispose of 20 smaller bombs. As always, the path of least resistance is the one of greatest evil. There is no optimal centrist pathway here, again selling the decisive nature of this stage. And there's also a time limit to contend with. The aesthetic of the stage is unfortunately somewhat lacking, being an almost total copy-paste of Westopolis in terms of its looks. There is a bit to spice it up from before, like with larger alien enemies, the glowing purple bombs that look almost like blooming flowers, and the rivers of green waste which tear the streets asunder. But it's just not quite enough to make it super visually interesting to me. The music is pretty good though, a frantic guitar riff which helps emphasize the panic involved in both objectives, as Shadow scrambles to come to a decision about who he's going to be, and the ramifications of his actions here. The ramifications of his mission objectives on my physical health, however, are far more severe than any of his emotional pain. My thumbs are blistered. The first time I played through this, I repeatedly missed the first large bomb simply because everything continues to follow the samey and labyrinthine formulas of the prior clunkers. It's definitely not the worst of the game's maze-like levels, it's actually one of the more straightforward, all things considered, but it starts to set a precedent for how these types of stages will play out, and the time limit definitely isn't helping matters. I do admittedly find it a little funny how quickly Doom will lambast you for lagging behind though. He goes from telling you about how humanity sucks and will just hurt you to being like,
God, you suck at this. Should have never trusted an incompetent moron like you.
Like, alright, yeah, you're really making a case for my loyalty to you right now.
Dude, you're like a complete nooberino. Like a little baby man.
What am I to you?
A nuisance.
I don't have to take this.
You have been and you will continue to do so.
Not anymore, Doom. Out of my way.
You've already gone out of your way to be an idiot.
I know you are, but what am I?
Not even you know that.
I'm going to turn you into a little brown stain.
Why?
Because you're insufferable.
Why?
Because that's your truth.
Why?
Why do you just keep saying why like that?
Why?
Ugh, I need to wipe out an entire city to release my frustration.
That said, we will of course do his bidding, and upon doing so, we return to where it all began. The 5th stage, the Ark. Doom basically decides to kill 2 birds with 1 stone here, bringing Shadow here not only to harness the Ark's power for his plans, but in turn, doing a number on Shadow psychologically. This is a very sensitive, traumatic place for him after all, so sending him headlong into it is bound to split those fragile seams in his mind even further. He tells Shadow to head in and destroy the colony's defense matrix, which will give his forces a clear path to the Eclipse Cannon. The colony is still surrounded by rubble and broken structures, likely due in no small part to its attempted crash in Sonic Adventure 2, which was stopped by Sonic and Shadow himself. Gun robots are diligently swarming the area, and to get around, we'll have to ride atop a black vault for most of the stage. This place is very reminiscent in design to the SA2 stage Final Rush, but with the architecture so heavily damaged, we'll have to make our way through largely off the ground. I've always loved the Ark from a design standpoint, so returning here and finding it in disarray is a visual treat not unlike what we got from our revisit to Prison Island. The music is maybe a bit more upbeat and funky than you'd expect from a stage this deep into the dark route, but I honestly can't complain. Its spiraling beat sells the feeling of returning to an origin point, of finishing what you started, and the way it's mixed together is just so effortlessly catchy. This is definitely one of those tracks I give a frequent listen just by itself. There's only a dark and centrist objective at this point, the latter being to ignore the objective and just shoot for the goal, and the former being to destroy 4 defense mechanisms for Doom. Like I said before, the flying gameplay isn't exactly my favorite, and it makes up a bulk of this stage. Still a fairly easy objective, and finding the things isn't like hunting for a needle in a haystack, so I can fairly effortlessly make my peace with it. This is a stage that succeeds more in its concept than in its actual fun factor, but it's not terrible either, so I'll definitely take it over what came directly before. Following this, we have another boss encounter, this time with a gun hover tank called the Blue Falcon. Under command from the commander, it's guarding the Eclipse Cannon control room to prevent us from getting into it. Doom urges us to use our need for revenge as fuel, while a remix of the boss theme for Bigfoot from Sonic Adventure 2 plays. It seems even more dire than in that game, but also more melancholic, really driving in the idea that Shadow was starting to become what he was feared to be back in that game. The boss itself isn't too tough, but it does require a decent bit of strategy to get through. You can use surrounding weapons to shoot at the machine and detach its rocket launchers, which will deal more damage once you pick them up. There's a big center platform that you can spring up to avoid some of its attacks, namely its shockwave-like particle beam cannon. For all of Gun's effort though, Shadow cannot be stopped so easily. With Blue Falcon's defeat, Doom broadcasts a message around the world, insisting that everyone give up trying to fight back against the aliens, and demonstrates their power by using the Eclipse Cannon to destroy Central City. The president is stunned, especially when they literally blow up the Sonic World equivalent of the White House.
Quite the visual for an E10+ game, wouldn't you say? Too bad it's ripped straight from Independence Day.
But the reason it's able to maintain that rating is pretty silly. Apparently, literally everyone was evacuated from the city already. Yeah, everyone, including the president somehow. I don't even think Sonic speed could match these people. Anyway, the president is safe at Gun HQ, but not for long. Tons of the Black Arms forces have flooded the fortress, and Shadow is right behind them. The commander insists that an experimental weapon, one that's apparently not quite ready, called the Diablon, be brought out as he cocks his gun, ready to confront Shadow. Shadow looks over the base, remembering Gerald's words, as he vows to bring peace to humanity, albeit in a twisted way. And thus begins the final stage of the route, Gun Fortress. The environment is industrial, in a word. There are underground parking lots, elevators, tons of fancy machinery and laser grids, and of course lots of robots and soldiers. It feels almost like you're playing through a Mission Impossible movie. But the vibe is fantastic. It's not the most visually eccentric stage out there, but it feels remarkably fitting for the final stop to this side of Shadow's twisted campaign. Gun is the central focus of Shadow's trauma and anger, so it only makes sense that in the story of his backslide into fury, they would be the final and primary target of said fury. The music is oddly calm, but carries a certain edge with it nevertheless, a decisiveness which gives you time to reflect on the choices that brought you here. Sure, the humans are fighting back as best as they can, but there's no real fair fight to be had. They're all just doing what they can before they're inevitably wiped out by you. This isn't a contest. But is that what we really wanted at the end of all of this? It's the kind of track that begs introspection on the player's part, underscoring the final stretch of horrors to follow, and it's excellent. As for the gameplay, I'd say it's better than most, even with the low bar. The missions are pretty rote and intent by now, but you can either finalize your stint of evil by destroying 3 mother computers for Black Doom, or you can try to have a last-minute redemption and follow Rouge the Bat, finding the Chaos Emerald to prevent Doom from getting his hands on it. I actually find it very emotionally resonant that Rouge of all people is your companion if you choose the last possible opportunity to turn back. Rouge was one of the first friends Shadow ever made, and though they've had a complicated relationship, first born out of necessity, then of genuine care, it's been a mainstay for Shadow up until this point. She was one of the first people to sway him, after all. You'll be spending most of this level making your way through corridors, caverns with mech defenses, and vehicle depots, incrementally continuing downward through the base. The final level of the route does decently well with the core idea behind Shadow's level design, even if it's a little bit more bland than the previous final stage. The turrets can be a bit clunky as they're very weak and prone to being broken down quickly once they're targeted, but as long as you can use chain guns, you can handle the mother computer's lickety-split. Once the base is cleared out, there's one final obstacle left. If you've committed to evil and all things sin, you'll pick a fight against the commander, piloting the Diablon, which winds up being a giant floating mech that looks like a Rock'em Sock'em robot. At the commander's side is Sonic himself, who is reluctant to face Shadow, but refuses to allow him to go any further down this path. I also find it resonant for Sonic to be the last one standing in your way here, literally saying he can't let Shadow go on like this, as if he wanted to believe until the last possible second that Shadow would turn around. It's unfortunate then that the boss itself is one of my least favorites. Aside from an extra inkling of information about the commander where he starts the fight by saying he's doing this for his family and for Maria, there's not a lot to grab onto. The Diablon will emit shockwaves after a certain amount of time, and is at its most prone when you attack Sonic, using him as a step stool for your homing attack. It's a bit janked though, as your most reliable form of attack here would be a weapon, but if you stop in front of the Iron Commando after attacking Sonic, he'll aim directly at you, making it nigh inevitable that you'll get blasted.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang!
Weapons and rings are also fairly scarce here, so being forced into this position can quickly turn a slog into an uphill battle of attrition. Once you defeat the unlikely duo, Sonic can only watch weakly in horror as he presumably dies, the commander not far behind, as Shadow declares his intention to join the Black Arms in destroying the planet. Peace through purification, through annihilation. One would think the alternative option, where you end up betraying and fighting Black Doom, would yield a slightly better outcome, but this isn't really the case. Since Black Doom's fight is also reused elsewhere, I'm going to save talking about it for later. But anywho, do you think Shadow would maybe see the error of his ways at the last moment, realize the beauty of humanity while rekindling his connection with one of his closest friends? Maybe something that would recontextualize that last cutscene where he promises the professor that he knows what to do now? Well, no. Instead, he just kind of tells Doom that it sucks to suck and that he's gonna take over the world by himself because he doesn't really need a lame-ass alien grandpa to tell him how to live his life. Also, Rouge just kind of disappears. So close to poignancy, and yet it eludes us yet again. Oh well, hold on to what if, am I right? All hail King President Emperor Supreme Shadow. The dark route of Shadow the Hedgehog is fascinating. In its gameplay, it absolutely struggled more this time around. Not all of the objectives were bad, but they were either somewhat poorly integrated or inoffensively boring at their best. There were a couple of standout stages, but most of those can be played elsewhere, and none of them made me think that this game was giving me an experience I needed to watch unfold, even just for the sake of seeing it. Really, the best thing about this route is the vibes, and I will admit, those vibes are pretty good. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely miserable, but that is kind of the point. Aside from the silly everyone evacuated from the city bits, it goes hard on its tone, and I respect that it was willing to skew towards its original vision. This is basically the Undertale No Mercy route of the Sonic series in many ways, and I think aside from its jumbled story presentation, it actually has some character depth. I joked earlier about Black Doom being quick to chastise Shadow, but really, working with him more directly throughout these missions called very quickly to my attention how genuinely ungrateful he is for the help. He's constantly belittling Shadow, calling him names and giving him curt commands of what to do. He treats Shadow less like an actual person and more as a tool or an extension of his own will, something that will inevitably bend the knee to him and must do as it's told. He deliberately invokes Shadow's worst memories while either blatantly lying to him or lying by omission, specifically for the purpose of making him as angry or as hurt as possible. The real tragedy of the Dark Route isn't that Shadow would believe Doom, because, well, he has amnesia, of course he's prone to being manipulated. It's that in this version of events, Doom gets to him first. He plants things in Shadow's head because he knows how to appeal to his worst impulses, and by the time Sonic and Co. try to get a foot in the door, it's already locked. Their friend is drifting further and further away from them, and the further you go into it, the more confined and removed from them you are. Even in the very end, Shadow is too deep within Doom's operation to see himself outside of it, and even trying to course correct at the last second won't get him out. Instead, he just externalizes that manipulation onto Doom himself, perpetuates the cycle he's been locked into rather than breaking it. The ending theme for the route, Almost Dead by Powerman 5000, is probably my least favorite of the vocal themes, unfortunately. I don't hate the dark metal vibe, but something about the vocals just doesn't do it for me. It's interesting how this leans harder into the industrial side of Shadow's musical inclinations, though, effectively solidifying Shadow's purpose as a machine of death, rather than contrasting his nature with that of his heart, like most tracks do with their incorporation of the typical Sonic-style rock. The lyrics are also very dour, arguably a bit overly so in my opinion. "Heaven can't save us, hell is a joke" is not a line you would expect to hear in a game with funny little anthro animals, that's for sure. Again though, regardless of the cheese, I have to respect the dedication, because if there's one thing I've learned about games like this, it's that you have to meet them in the middle a little bit. It might sound silly to talk so seriously about the plot of a game where a black and red hedgehog touts firearms around on behalf of aliens, but what I always try to remember is that while the setting is exaggerated, the events within the context of the story are treating themselves seriously, and if I similarly try to feel what is being put across to me, I can understand the vision. Ultimately, this route is where the biggest issues are starting to show more prominently, I think, but the creative vision is also joining them from out behind the curtain, and I think they were more on point with its delivery than in the centrist paths. Some things still kneecap it, the reluctance to go all the way and to keep softening their strongest narrative blows does come across as a bit weak to me, but considering Shadow is still implied to be on track to destroy the entire planet by the end either way, yeah, I think the city getting evacuated once isn't really gonna matter much for them in the long run. They're all kinda screwed.
Okay, so let's merge over and course correct a little bit. Let's put in the minimal effort and become, less evil. Surely we can manage that much, right?
The story begins one way no matter which winding road it takes, except this time we can skip a little bit of the fluff. We're now on the semi-dark path, which means we're going to start things off like we're playing the dark route, but make a divergence partway through. We'll still dismantle Gun and Wistopolis and destroy their mainframe and digital circuit, but once we get to Cryptic Castle, we're not feeling the poison in our veins. Shadow's had enough evil for today. We'll just scurry to the goal ring instead. Starting from here, this leads us to a new set of stages for 4 through 6. Shadow is obviously a bit conflicted about what's going on, having aborted his mission for evil halfway, and Doom hits him up in the forest to try to convince him that the dark side's still worth it, my guy. Come on, we can make this work.
Bro, seriously? You're trading thrills and kills for Benadryl and a mortgage?
You've run me ragged to the Home Depot 5 times because you kept needing different kinds of screws. You had your chance to prove your worth. I'm the pilot of my own life.
You couldn't pilot a tech deck with 3 fingers cut off.
Watch it! You know I'm sensitive about my large fingers. Maybe you should consider anger management classes.
Maybe you should consider not being a pussy.
Maybe you should consider making a damn list!
Alright, there's it. You're going into the anomalous flashback cube.
What? No, wait!
Trying the same old manipulative song and dance as before, Doom basically creates a living memory of the Space Colony arc from 50 years prior, plunging Shadow into an approximation of his life there alongside Maria. Yes, Maria herself is here, and this level is called the Doom. Very creatively entitled of the Black Arms head honcho. Alongside one other stage in a different path, this is one of 2 flashback stages in Shadow the Hedgehog, a fascinating study in excellent theming and horrific design. Here we once again have 3 objectives we can follow. We can head to the goal ring for a centrist pathway, we can give in to Doom's goading and destroy 60 gun soldiers for the dark path, or we can save 10 injured researchers with health packs alongside Maria. The environment, discounting the level design itself for a moment, is remarkably atmospheric. Most of the halls and walls are metallic, but the glowing green of lasers and screens, the yellow and black checker trims, the sterile labs and hallways to nowhere, it all feels very claustrophobic and clinical. At the same time, though, it feels like a home, the way Maria recounts little things alongside Shadow, an imprint of a comforting memory, ready to turn this cold backdrop into a place that, for a time, might have held more significance. There's something genuinely beautiful and haunting to me about the idea of being thrust into this memory, of something Shadow desperately wants back but knows will never actually return to him. It only continues to paint Doom in a truly sinister light, considering that he would take such clear advantage of Shadow by doing this. The music, however, I have to say, just doesn't land for me. It's certainly a fittingly discordant and blippy sounding track for an isolated space station, but I don't quite feel like it captures the dark and somber tone a stage like this should invoke. Maybe this is because it's focusing more on the lack of harmony in Shadow's heart, a fraying mess of feelings as he navigates these tight corridors, trying to decide what to do with this irreconcilable rage. But I think it could have used a softer, more yearning touch, something that calls to mind a desire for what's been lost to time. But mechanically is easily where these flashback levels suffer the most. The mess of identical corridors, sliding doors, and map rooms which provide little to no actual help is really what kills it. The arc is incredibly cumbersome to navigate, not the type of thing that's particularly reasonable to ask of your dominantly 10-year-old crowd. This stage and one other I'll be talking about later are actually the reason I never fully completed this game as a kid, because I got stuck doing them for too long and didn't have the patience to see them through. Even now as an adult who can keep better track of my objectives, these were easily the most time-consuming levels to play, and really left me feeling burnt out by the time I finished. Considering there's still another 2 stages to go after this too, yeah, that's a lot to ask. Let's just go for the goal ring, I don't have the energy for much else. But even in the end, we're not done here. We've got another boss to crush. This time, it's a gun mech called Heavy Dog.
I too fight military robots in my mind palace sometimes. What? No, don't you do that, you bastard. I've got the upper hand!
Doom continues laying his manipulation on thick here too, as the pilot is literally implied to be the soldier who shot Maria. He's doing all he can to paint a very specific picture of humanity for Shadow, isn't he? But whether we believe him or not, we still have to fight. This boss is pretty similar to the Blue Falcon from earlier and has a similar strategy to defeat it, just lacking the giant platform in the sky. Instead, there are multiple raised platforms off the ground that are littered about the room, which makes this pretty easy. You can manipulate whether he uses his particle beam cannon on the lower or upper levels, depending on where you're standing as he uses it, which makes juking him simple to accomplish. The music is once again a reprisal of the Bigfoot theme from SA2, but with a bit of a harder emphasis on the guitars. You could take this as a more aggressive show on Shadow's part, or you could take it as some of his heart, represented by the more traditional instrumentation, seeping its way back in, as a result of your more lukewarm choices. After bringing the machine down, Shadow exits his flashback as we move ahead. With Eggman's fleet out of the picture, Shadow conditioned to hate humanity more than ever, and Central City a wasteland, Gun is on the back foot. The commander insists on evacuating their forces alongside the president to their air fleet, as Doom commands us to chase it down. This begins the 5th level of this route, aptly titled Air Fleet. This is probably one of the most infamous stages in the game due to its objectives. The centrist route is just to help find the Chaos Emerald. The hero route sees us helping Miles Tails Prower to take down 35 alien enemies, and the Dark mission has us targeting the president's escape pod. Yeah, Black Doom literally just says that Shadow should kill the president.
They're gonna put me on a watch list for this one, huh?
This stage is pretty similar in aesthetic to the Gun Fortress, but here we have sprawling outside sections as we fly through the air. The expanse is drenched in a warm sunset, which is a bit of a calm look for something like this, I must say, but you know, it's a nice afternoon, a leisurely presidential assassination, all's well on a lazy Sunday. That said, there is a shockingly chilling line from Talesable characters here, in relation to this, which does reframe the way I look at this aesthetic choice, even if I'm not really doing the hero mission here.
I guess I've always taken sunsets for granted. I'm afraid of nightfall tonight.
Well damn, alright. Mission-wise, this is pretty inoffensive, if not tedious. The shuttle can soak a metric ton of punishment before it goes down, and taking out 35 enemies is just as monotonous as it's always been, so that's cold comfort. If it weren't for that hilarious dark objective, I don't know that this stage would be worth remembering. Even the music just kinda coasts along. It's not particularly memorable to me. I've got very little to say about this. This stage just has no sense of urgency about it, and this track doesn't really make a spark. Either way, I'm not doing either of these missions, just getting to the end. Just as unnatural for the stage's progression as ever. Shadow's black, Sonic's blue, whatever. With 5 Chaos Emeralds in hand, Black Doom once again just assumes Shadow is working for his benefit, even though he's been ignoring him for 3 straight stages now.
Just let it go, man. He's not calling you back.
And calls us up to the Black Comet to take care of some pests. I'm sorry, what? The Black Comet? You mean from the newspaper at the beginning? Yeah, well it turns out that the strange comet that passes once every 50 years is actually the home of the Black Arms hive mind, a strange dark purple hellscape with viscous rivers, contoured architecture, and tentacles everywhere. This place from a design standpoint rules. It is an affront to God and saturated in murky colors, but damn does it make an impression. The music is also fantastic, easily making up for how underwhelmed I was by Airfleet. It sells all of the precariousness of the situation. The Black Arms have taken the lead, the humans are scrambling to make a dent in their forces, and this deciding battle could make or break the situation for either side. Both have mighty allies, with even Knuckles on sabbatical from Emerald duty to try to get to the center of the comet on behalf of Gun. There's an unspoken anxiety in the air through all of this, a tension, as the warring parties do what they can to pull Shadow over the line. Whoever he decides to help is going to have a major advantage. It's the last chance for humanity to pull through, or be totally wiped out by their invaders. We only have 2 decisions to make here now. We can help Doom exterminate Gun by destroying 50 hero-aligned enemies, or we can head straight to the goal ring with Knuckles to turn the tide in Earth's favor. This place is huge, and we're back to pushing forward against more than a few frustrating sections. Riding on the air saucer so much really drags the affair down for me. You'll find yourself on a constant forward march, thankfully, so regardless of the chosen objective, you're at least not running in circles. Knuckles isn't a half-bad partner either. Unlike Sonic, he doesn't chuckle, surely more Shadow's speed. That said, I do need to start with the Dark Mission, which drags things down in 2 ways. First, there's Gun Soldier Murder Slaughter Snooze Fest, and then there's the boss. It's Sonic and Diablon again. The cutscene's a little weird here thanks to the translation. Shadow says he needs to bring order to humanity because they don't value life, so he'll kill them?
What is he, Jigsaw?
This makes a lot more sense in the Japanese script, where Shadow says he's basically an appointed judge for humanity who's seen the way that they live and has decided that they don't deserve to. One roundabout boss encounter later, we've got our ending. Sonic asks Shadow why he's doing this, to which he responds by saying he was born to serve Black Doom and will turn the world into his empire. So, you know, just the dark ending again, but with the spicy sprinkle of mind manipulation along the way. Fun. The ending you get for doing the hero mission is even weirder, as Shadow basically just tells Knuckles to do what he wants before going off to face the egg dealer, who is skulking around here for some reason. Eggman tells Shadow he initially got released to find the Chaos Emeralds for him, and it would do good to hand them over, after which they fight. And Shadow tells Eggman that nobody tells him what to do, karate chopping him to death once more. And, That's it, he does not elaborate. These endings are pretty awful, I'm not gonna lie. At best, they're a reiteration of ones we've already gotten, and at worst, they're just kind of the most basic angsty teenager response Shadow can muster for the situation. Devoid of context, devoid of meaning, nobody tells me what to do, not accounting for literally all the time you spent letting people tell you what to do. Perfect. This route is, I think, everything people see when they think about Shadow the Hedgehog. It isn't completely devoid of interesting concepts, but it hardly feels worth it when you see the results. It carries its edge around like a wound it can't close up, or rather, one it could have closed up but decided was cooler not to. I'll get infected if I want to, Mom. This isn't a phase. You might think we've reached peak ridiculousness here, which is great because we haven't even gotten to some of the funniest scenes in the game yet, but I'm struggling to make it there right now. We're officially at the point where this has started to become more of a chore than something to enjoy again and again, and that's not a great sign. I don't even have a credits song to talk about this time going for me, because we're just reusing Almost Dead again. If I was hanging by a thread before, this route has killed my momentum altogether. Is there even a way for it to pick itself back up? Does it still have any cards left up its sleeve?
Give it a chance.
Huh? Seriously, can you, explain what you are, or...
Hindsight's 2020. What's good today may not be good tomorrow.
So is your job just to speak in riddles, or...
That is retrospect.
Well, it appears we need to continue on, as my personal narrative still has some loose threads. I'm not one to skimp on details. Anyway,
maybe we can only expect so much from the grimdark, right? I guess we can do something truly good, for once. Oh god, it hurts to even say. It's like razor blades between my teeth and the plastic I chewed off of Slipknot CDs. Welcome to the semi-hero route, when being good just isn't quite good enough. Seems cognitive behavioral therapy wasn't all Shadow needed after all. Things can always be a bit more complicated than that. The story begins one way, no matter which winding road it takes. In f***ing Westopolis again! Sorry, I'm so tired of this place. Please, by all means, bomb it into oblivion. Oh, wait, I can't let that happen. I have to help Sonic this time. Feels surreal to have him tagging along with his goofy quips. Quaint to have him chattering in our ear after several playthroughs of pure, concentrated misery. It's like going to a screening of The Human Centipede with commentary by Statler and Waldorf. After combing through the city once again, helping Sonic clear the area of the Black Arms, he proposes we keep the momentum going and have a friendly competition all the while. Shadow is predictably super tsundere about it, and Black Doom still can't tell which route we're on apparently because he gives Shadow another command. Seriously, when will he clue in? This is just sad.
I'm starting to think we got off on the wrong tentacle.
Just now.
Do not make fun of me. I'm mentally ill and have a tragic backstory. My companion was killed at a space colony.
Wait, really?
And no, I can't believe you fell for that, oh my god.
You're sick. Your whole business is financed by perverse cruelty. You told me earlier to call all of those so-called friends of mine slurs I can't reclaim.
I'm not the same man that I was 5 seconds ago. I'm worse.
This leads us to the second stage, Lethal Highway. It's yet another city setting directly after Westopolis, so it's a little too directly on the visually homogenous side for my liking. The missions aren't terabad here, though. If you decide to take the Dark mission, all you have to do is guns blaze it to the end. The Hero mission isn't much more complex. You're still partnered up alongside Sonic, and the Black Arms are taking the defensive after their initial invasion didn't go so well. The goal is to stop the aliens' tank from beating a hasty retreat, destroying it before it can leave the city limits. The tank itself has some beef on it, but not hair-tearingly so. It'll only take a few good clips to put down if you manage your ammo well. This does incentivize you to run through a lot, which means the less linear stage elements seem a bit arbitrary. They don't get in the way as much here, but they're not particularly well integrated either. The most annoying part of this stage has to be the fact that the roads are all suspended once again over bottomless pits, which means ill-timed jumps or knockback can send you hurtling to your doom. Previous 3D Sonic games were always a little generous with knockback, letting you recover quickly and potentially saving yourself from untimely falling deaths, but this game, not so kind. Knockback pretty much always makes Shadow completely prone and thus much more likely to fall endlessly with a curse-laden quip. There's also the same problem as Westopolis, where skybeams and bombs frequently disrupt the terrain or just snipe you out of nowhere, and the enemies are no less abundant, which makes fast traversal not only precarious but numbingly so. There's these visual callbacks to Radical Highway from Sonic Adventure 2 here though, so that's neat. The aesthetic of the level may be on the bland end, but the flowing red Black Arms flesh appendages are pretty gruesomely highlighted against the nighttime backdrop, And the music is pretty good here too, an urgent rock riff being the perfect vibe for an exciting chase. Overall, not a fantastic stage, but not a terrible one either. Let's just call it decent. After helping Sonic take down the tank, we are once again given a boss encounter to deal with. Black Doom is finally starting to clue into the fact that we don't want to help him, and has called Black Bull over to deal with it. Black Bull is a strange chubby cherub-looking thing with one eye that spits fire and generates enemies. This boss is pretty simple when you get down to it. You just have to homing attack chain across all of the flying enemies to hit his eye, then shoot him with weapons when you get the chance, while avoiding his shockwaves. Unfortunately, the homing attack is at its most unreliable here, not staying locked on the eye once you get over and forcing you to the ground with no way back up. This doesn't halt your progression wholesale, but it does significantly slow things down, which can make this little bug boss more grueling than it needs to be. Past that setback, it's so easy that not much else needs to be said about it. The music's kind of just another generic rock fight theme, but it services the lackluster fight okay. Pretty forgettable. After another look at what the President's up to, we get one of the most famous scenes in the entire game.
Where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald?
Ah, a 2005 vintage. You don't get one of those very often nowadays.
There was an inferno in there!
Are you still crying about the burns?
Shadow somehow apparently left Sonic in the dust because there's no real rhyme or reason to this transition. Shadow sees Tails with an emerald in his plane, sees him crash yet again, and decides to set about getting it. This is our third stage, Circus Park, and it's okay. Apparently, this is a place made out of all the stolen rings that Eggman has accumulated over time, though how exactly that works in any practical sense is a mystery to me. Aren't they just a game abstraction? Okay, no time for meta, let's get to funny business. The carnival romp makes for pretty cool set dressing. It's a bit mustard yellow for my tastes, and the contrasting blue sky background just makes it look a little ugly, but that's just me. There's still a lot of fun stuff here, almost makes me think of a hybrid between Casino Night Zone from Sonic 2 and Twinkle Park from Sonic Adventure. There are tightropes, balloons, little towers, checkerboard floors, and my god.
You people are sick, you know that?
The missions are low stakes this time around. Destroy 20 gun robots for Eggman, collect 400 rings for Tails, or hightail it to the end and find the Chaos Emerald while ignoring both of them. Well, I have to admit, getting 400 rings sounds like a tall price to pay to a 5-year-old. I think that's enough do-gooding for now. I'm just gonna get to the big ring. Works all the same to me anyway, because this music also just doesn't click with me. It encapsulates the idea of a circus park well enough, like as a theme, there are definitely horns. Maybe I just have residual anger from doing Turnabout Big Top, is that what this is? The design is simple enough. There's all these little open pockets where you're incentivized to stick around more for the mission goals, but it's easy to get through if you're not focusing on all of that. Little shooting gallery minigames are put around for you to gain rings if you want, but they're kind of finicky. Auto-aim is not nearly as good on the balloons as on the enemies. I wouldn't recommend doing them unless you're on the hero mission. I actually had to be very careful not to fulfill the hero mission's win condition on accident while trying to get to the goal ring, since there are so many places where you're golden showered with rings. Overall, this level is the carnival of all time. Fulfills its purpose, but I don't have a ton of enthusiasm for it. Like a jeering clown sitting at the dunk tank. It's on the lower end of fine. Continuing the trend of abrupt transitions, once we finish up here, we cut to Team Chaotix trying to hack into the computer terminal in one of Eggman's bases. Shadow just spontaneously starts strutting in because, I guess Eggman just makes it that easy these days, and Vector asks for his help, looking to get some top secret information. Shadow, wanting to know things that only Eggman does himself, decides to acquiesce to their request and karate chops the computer, which creates a portal into the computer world, which he then jumps in alongside Espio.
I'm pretty sure this is the plot of Ready Player One.
Yeah, this, similarly to Digital Circuit, just operates on the rule of cool. Mad Matrix does not stop to give any explanation for why these characters can suddenly enter the internet. It just happens. And you know what? Fair enough. I'm glad that you can't do this in real life, though. So many people would have tried to fistfight me by now, you have no idea. No clue if this is gonna activate any sleeper agents, but I genuinely kind of hate this stage. The main gimmick is that you need to travel alongside these automated lines to visit 4 different color-coded areas of the stage. It's an absolute maze, which is astoundingly difficult to find your way around in, and each path also has a bunch of bombs you can activate for Black Doom's Dark Mission, which commonly get in your way. The hero mission with Espio is to access the 4 terminals, meaning that you'll have to visit all of these sectors, and the centrist mission still sees you having to get your way over to the Red Tower to find the goal ring inside. There's literally grids people have made of this place because it is so complicated. It doesn't play very well into either the standard Sonic style or the shooting gameplay because most of your time will be spent navigating the difficult to control pathways with horrible camera angles. Great. It's a shame because this stage has the better theme music between it and Digital Circuit to me. It's much less droning and has this harder, better, faster, stronger robot rock rhythm to follow along with. The riff is nice and crunchy, while the sound design still maintains this very techy vibe, letting it still capture the level's atmosphere quite well. As before, the cyberized look is still great. The grid itself even looks awesome when divorced from the context of, actually having to play around with it. This level also has another funny bit of dissonance, similar to Cryptic Castle, as Eggman's forces are here, but so are the Black Arms. This means Espio will scold you for harming Eggman's robots, giving the explanation that we need to be stealthier. Espio, buddy, you weren't even stealthy when you got here. I don't want to hear it. However, once you finally finish the stage, you're facing off with the Egg Breaker again, during which he spawns pawns to attack you during the fight. If you attack them here, Espio will still scold you for not being stealthy. Like, dude, it's not a problem anymore. I'm pretty sure the man in front of us knows we're here. The before battle cutscene is also pretty funny. Shadow asks Eggman about his past, and Eggman once again reiterates his words from Sonic Heroes, that Shadow has no past. I understand what he's trying to get at, but it makes it sound like he's saying Shadow has literally nothing special going on. Like, you are not special. You are just some guy. Go home, touch grass. After yet another encounter with Spikeball Handman, Shadow exits the computer world and runs into Sonic, who evidently wound up riding on a ship with Tails headed to the Ark. I've heard a lot of people poke fun at the translation quality in this scene because of these lines.
Looks like those black creatures are headed out to space. We're on our way to the Ark. So I guess that means we're going too.
I've never really had a problem with the phrasing here, though. It's awkward. He probably should say they're on their way to the Ark, so I guess that means we're going too. But it's not as if the line as written doesn't make sense in this context either. Sonic says the Black Arms are headed to space, then follows up by saying they're headed to the Ark, so that means they're going to space too. Does that make sense? Listen, there's plenty to hate about this game. I just want people to focus on the things that actually matter, you know? Shadow seems to be curious about his point of origin, holding this strange wistfulness for it as he reluctantly boards with Sonic. He even remembers dying. Before he can get too depressed, though, Sonic snaps him out of his funk by acting pumped for the fight ahead and racing out, which grabs Shadow's attention due to his competitive instinct. The following stage, Space Gadget, is something of a callback to Sonic Adventure 2's Final Rush because of this, with Sonic proposing a friendly race to the Chaos Emerald while weaving between the ongoing fight between Gun and the Black Arms. It's like a thematic inverse of their climactic confrontation back when they first met, working to find the Chaos Emerald not as two enemies seeking to screw each other over, but as friends working toward a similar goal and having a bit of fun with it. Sonic even says that it's just like old times. I really like this as a backdrop for a level. It works surprisingly well to give you an emotional attachment to what's happening, and Sonic's goofy enthusiasm really is infectious. The level, of course, looks great, seeing as it's modeled after one of the coolest looking stages from SA2, so there's not much to say that I haven't already. Not all Sonic nostalgia bait is good, but I'll bite here. I wish the music was a little less low-key, though. It works for the friendly vibe of the competition, but I feel it should have been a tinge more urgent. The guitar's too laid back, even if it does sound good. A reprise or remix of Final Rush would have worked out great here. You can either find the Chaos Emerald before the time limit is up to succeed at the hero mission and beat Sonic in the race, or you can find the Chaos Emerald after the time limit expires for the Centrist mission. Or you can forgo all of that and destroy 6 defense systems for Doom to let the aliens in if you want to make the evil swerve. I'm headed for centrism, regrettably, which means even if I'm decent enough at the game and can make it to the goal ring well before the time limit, I just gotta stand here tapping my foot and waiting for the seconds to run themselves down so I can lose to Sonic. And as much as I love the framing device of a race with the blue blur, he's simply not programmed to actually run around here. The timer and some voice clips are all you get to assess where he is. Even if you're sitting right by the goal ring when the timer expires, you're not gonna see him come by, which feels cheap, but hey, he is the fastest thing alive. The level itself is decent, but not great. What brings the work down this time is an abundance of combat pit stops and these gravity panel things. Whenever you hit them, the gravity is supposed to adjust and fling you to other differing platforms. Problem being that it's piss easy to hit them from the wrong angle and be sent hurtling off the path you were intended to go towards, creating cheap deaths that rarely feel within the player's control. This stage and one other space-themed stage we'll get to soon are at the core of why I died so much in the latter half of this route. Even with skill issues, I don't think I'm really that bad at this game. It was pretty irritating to feel like I was getting hit with these through no fault of my own, but let's save a bit of our energy for a moment, shall we? Running down the checklist, thematically, aesthetically, this level earns my ups. Music, gameplay, it falls flat. Mid, as the people who don't write 50k word scripts for a living might say. Before we get to the final stage of this route, though, we have another cutscene. This one, dropped smack dab into the middle of this equally middling route, is by far one of the most important ones in the entire game. Shadow is confused, vulnerable, as his memories seem to return at points and not in others. He could be an android, he could come from nothing, but now he also has to contend with possibly still being the same Shadow from SA2, or at least inheriting his will and memories. He's primed for picking off by an angry gun commander, who's finally here to try exacting his vengeance. Before he can do that though, he has to explain why he even wants vengeance in the first place. He says that because of Shadow, everyone he knew and loved was killed on the Ark, including Maria, who was like a sister to him when he was a child. Apparently, his family were researchers there, and he witnessed Shadow's creation by Gerald alongside Black Doom. So okay, bomb drop. In case the red and black color scheme wasn't enough to imply it already, Shadow and the Black Arms are indeed related somehow, and a fearful child may have acted as a whistleblower for everything the United Federation got antsy about with Shadow's creation. I've seen people call out the hypocrisy of the gun commander for hating Shadow for what happened on the Ark since he's, you know, working for the people who killed Maria and all those people in the first place, but I think we have to keep something in mind here. I think this is an intentional character flaw, and one that's actually rather well considered when it comes down to it. He probably had a busy family if he was one of the only children on the Ark with researchers as parents, and so Maria was likely one of the closest people he had to him at the time. His irrational fear of Shadow spurned from appearance is analogous largely to the same fear the entire government had of Shadow despite his kind heart, and acts as the perfect tip of a domino to start a tragedy, the straw to break a camel's back if he's the one who leaked this information out of said fear. As a result of this and other mounting tensions, the Ark massacre occurred, even depriving the boy of his family. For whatever reason, Gunn saw fit to take this child under their wing and raise him to be a part of their ranks. Likely horrified and embittered by his experiences, he did the only thing he could to escape inevitably blaming himself. To escape that cognitive dissonance, he needed a scapegoat for his feelings, which was Shadow. He blindly puts his faith in Gunn simply because accepting that they're guilty would be like accepting his own guilt for the tragedy too, and he can't do that. Putting a bullet in Shadow's the only way he can make peace with himself, but that's not going to work. Shadow has stuff to do, after all, but he still gives the guy a bit of a consolation. And this may be some of my favorite characterization from Shadow in this entire game.
お前の言うことが真実であるのなら、僕は慎んで罪を償う。
本当に覚えていないのか。
しかし、今は時間をくれ。僕に真実を探す時間を。
Damn. You know, people say Shadow's really out of character in this game, but I think that scene goes to show that that's not entirely true. Sure, he has his goofy moments, sure, the edge really gets laid on a bit thick, and it's probably because of that edge that people make very weird and inaccurate assessments of Shadow's character. But I think this was more of a flanderization of 1,000 paper cuts sort of deal. It's no secret that modern Shadow takes a lot of the wrong cues from this version of the character, but the more I replay this story, the more I wonder if he's really that different from SA2 Shadow here. I think people just assume it because of this game's vibe and some of the sillier isolated moments. Don't worry, we'll get to the
taking candy from a baby
line soon enough. But ultimately, people aren't paying super close attention to this game for its actual story writing. Most people don't give a single damn about that. It's just the hilarity of the edginess of the time that leaves the strongest impression. Shadow's characterization from here on typically just stems from this collective misinterpretation both among fans and the general public, born from how this game looked rather than how it actually read. Because this scene right here, this is definitely Shadow to me. Anyway, on to the final level of the route, Cosmic Fall. Boy, talk about complicated feelings, am I right?
Listen, I was really nice there for a minute. You gotta give me this. I have a quota to fill.
This stage is basically the perfect example of the typical problems I've had with most of these levels. We're given so much good with its visuals and plot, but it flops hard purely because of the cobbled-together skeleton of a game beneath it all. For starters, this stage uses a lot of the same art visuals from before, so it has that going for it. But it's also falling to pieces through the air, free-falling in a way that says so much with so little. The battle between Gunn and the Black Arms has left the space station's already shaky integrity to fall apart at the seams, and there are only 15 minutes to get out before the place collapses. Shadow is meanwhile the most mentally vulnerable he's ever been. He was already confused, and now he was just fed a heaping helping of the commander's trauma to go with it, which also implied he may have been created in part by the evil aliens. He's right back where he started, the place of his origin, but it's so different now. The once bustling and lively station is abandoned and decrepit. It's falling apart all around him, just like his entire life and sense of self are doing in response to what he's been through. The music, while definitely catchy with great guitars, also has this spiraling quality, a constant sound of descent as a sine-like sound wails downward like a continuous plummet. It's genuinely perfect, and as a concept for a level, it is fantastic. Everything you could ever want from a story creatively at this point.
Shame about how it plays, though.
My only words to describe this level are filled with cheap BS. Platforming around the floating debris is a nightmare, and the biggest exacerbator of this mess is Shadow's slippery controls. Never in the rest of this entire game have I died so many times, especially to our old friend, Bottomless Pits. I know it fits the theme, but maybe ride the line between stylization and accessibility, you know? Christ. There are also a lot of enemies around. You'd think maybe they would be around to make it easier to hop from place to place with your homing attack, but it's even easier to run into something on these narrow platforms, get hit with knockback, and instantly eat shit for it. Oh, yeah, thanks. Real fair, asshole. The only areas where you have a chance to breathe are the interior areas, but even then, they're basically just giant enemy gauntlets you're mashing through at best. The time limit is pretty generous, thankfully, but your lives... yeah, this might be the only point where I'd say you've really gotta be careful about them. I game overed on this stage twice. For context, I never game overed literally anywhere else in the game. The missions are at least pretty simple to compensate. The Dark mission is simply to hunt down the Chaos Emerald with Doom, while the Hero mission sees you accompanying Vector the Crocodile to... say it with me.
Find the computer room!
Yep, there we go. Both of those are just a matter of following a forward path through the level, so the actual design of your route is a lot easier, if I can give this stage anything to complement it in how it actually plays. Doom's objective is slightly earlier on, while Vector's takes you a tiny bit past it. Since we're doing the semi-hero route, let's start with the hero mission's outcome, shall we? Well, right after I rank this stage. Unfortunately, I think this has got to be classified as certifiably kinda bad. The atmosphere and narrative concepts are immaculate, the music bangs, but there's only so much leeway I can give it when it's not fun to play. In fact, it's one of the most infuriating to play. Doesn't get the lowest rank though, we'll save that. Together with Vector, we find the computer room, which does look pretty awesome. It's almost like a wall-to-wall city of panels, surrounded by pillars lit by a sickly green glow. Shadow is still unsure of himself, and Doom isn't helping when he confirms that he helped create Shadow. Saying that Shadow has been brainwashed by the humans into accepting their punishment, he intends to kill us himself and launches us right into his boss fight. We skimmed over this one once before, but since this is the primary ending of the route and the one with the most meat of the two, I'm gonna talk about it more directly now. Doom has a variety of attacks that make him a pest to deal with. He constantly hovers around the arena projecting ghostly watermarks of himself, often only being accessible from several central platforms he'll linger around. He'll rain down mini meteors, shoot energy boomerangs, use an energy shield, teleport, and turn invisible. There are weapons lying around for you to use, which are the most reliable method of dealing damage towards him, though your homing attacks can work too if timed right. It's difficult to tell when he will or won't be immune to shots, but you usually just have to space your attacks out correctly after his own phase is out. The only complaint I'd really say I have about this boss is that the window for dealing damage can be much too short, so it makes the pace start drooping while you're waiting to get the space for your next opportunity. The music also doesn't really hit here. It's fittingly dramatic and has great instrumentation, but it sounds a bit too boilerplate orchestral sounding for a character like Black Doom in my opinion. I suppose going with a sound palette that's more refined isn't a terrible choice, but I also believe it could have benefited the game to go even harder in the grungy direction, considering who Doom is and his freaky eldritch beast character design. Not a bad track by any means, just another that falls into the background instead of sticking around as an earworm. It's much like the fight itself in that way. For the game's biggest baddie, it's underwhelming. It's not egregiously difficult, even if it drags. It's just that, well, honestly, if I had to choose, I would have actively preferred more difficulty if it was planned to last as long as it does. Black Doom has really built himself up across the narrative as this grand manipulator and force for re-traumatization in Shadow's life. You'd think he deserves a tougher encounter, but no, he just goes down like a lame ass. Sad? Well, there's other alien freaks. The post-battle is actually depressing, with Shadow accepting that his existence is a mistake, claiming that he never should have been created at all. Vector tries to console him in his own interesting way.
Hey, don't go there! Yet!
What did he mean by this?
Hey, buddy, don't be such a downer. There are folks in your corner, not including me, of course.
Name one.
I guess the good doctor seems to have an interest in... No, wait, that ain't good. What about that Maria gal you... Right, she's gone.
Well, Charmy seems to like you.
I never collected his secret discs from Prison Island.
Oh, never mind, he hates your ass.
Turns out this is a pretty wonky translation, though. The original line is way better.
Oi, 早まんじゃねえ。奴らの言うことなんて気にすんな。お前さんは。
This ending itself is actually pretty haunting, but let's get into that in a second. What happens if you take the dark route? Well, you, fight the egg dealer again? Why is he here? Never explained. Okay, Eggman says that Shadow was basically a pretty cool invention of his grandfather's, but he doesn't need hand-me-downs, and will spare Shadow's life in exchange for the 6 emeralds he's collected. Shadow refuses, defeating Eggman and concluding that he will become an isolated guardian of the Ark in space, dedicated to protecting it and honoring the memory of the victims in atonement, banishing Eggman from ever stepping foot inside again, but sparing his life.
You're all banned!
Both of these endings read as very thematically resonant to me, and it fits very well with Shadow's dual nature. In the more heroic ending, Shadow concludes that it's far better for him to not even exist, torn between wanting to live, but feeling undeserving of being alive. Once he learns of his origins being linked to Black Doom, it's as if he sees himself as irreversibly stained, unable to exist in the light. Vector tries to comfort him and change his mind, but he doesn't even have the words to convince him before he slinks off. Even in the dark variant of the ending, which seems a bit less immediately depressing, Shadow has effectively isolated himself. He has no real intention to grow because he's still removing himself from the conflict with the Black Arms entirely, meaning that the world will inevitably fall due to his inaction. He stays completely tethered to his past, unable to grow from it or move on with his life, purely defined by this perceived sin in a way that inhibits his ability to actually be a person. The ending within the game's library mode is literally called Funeral Procession in Space. It's just that kind of story, I guess. Wow, what a downer. The ending song, Chosen One by A2, is a nice slice of mid-noughties soft rock that perfectly punctuates the heaviness, though I gotta admit the lyrics are pretty blasé, talking about the burdens of feeling like you have to do right by the people around you, despite feeling unable and unworthy. Apparently, this song wasn't even the first pick originally, that being a song called Broken by Sins of a Divine Mother, which I personally think sounds a lot better. The reason it wasn't used, despite being the team's original intention, was because the singer, Wiley B, couldn't be tracked down by the original group for permissions to use his work. Instead, some of the members of Sins, who would later form A2, offered to make a similar track with the same style, thus leading to the creation of Chosen One. Apparently, the only way to find Broken back during the time of the game's release was because it was posted on the Sins of a Divine Mother MySpace page, so yeah, really speaking to the era here. The semi-hero route to me is a bit of a jumbled mess. Most of the better levels are unsatisfying by their end, and the worst ones really soured my experience. As a story, however, I think it's really started picking up some of the disparate pieces here, justifying this game's greater place in Shadow's narrative and making a good case for why it was made, more of which I'll get into later. But this is a game experience, and those bits don't glue back to the whole quite so easily and are at risk of falling apart, much like Shadow's fragile psyche has been. We've only got 2 endings left until we're ready to face the ultimate end, though, and far more of the interesting things I want to say springboard off of this material and is best saved for when it can properly be elaborated on. So let's keep on moving ahead. Let's finally realize our heroic potential, stop taking half measures, and hopefully steer Shadow in the right direction at last. It's challenging work, but hopefully it will be worth it.
You're almost there. You're farther than I've ever been. Didn't you think you hated this?
Well, I probably thought so.
Do you?
Let me get back to you on that. The story begins one way, no matter which winding road it takes. Patricide. Didn't Freud say something about that?
How do you know who Freud is?
I've seen things, Shadow. We actually don't have anything new to talk about until the end of Casino Park. Westopolis is the same, Lethal Highway is the same, Black Bolt still sucks, and then we collect 400 rings for Tails instead of leaving him behind. It's really not that bad, all things considered. The things are everywhere, and while it may take some careful combing, it didn't take as long as I thought. That said, I'd like to take a brief moment to bring up something that I've been holding off on talking about, and it's one of my biggest narrative gripes with this game. I feel like I've been somewhat lenient toward it up until now because there are ideas in it that I like, barring its presentation issues. That said, damn, why are Sonic and Co so ready and willing to shill for Gun in this story, man? I know it's most likely just for the alignment system and convenience with how the game mechanics are set up and all that, but it really does rub me the wrong way to see the hero-aligned characters constantly scold you for attacking Gun and saying they're on the side of justice. Like, I don't know if these people forgot that Gun were basically trying to kill or imprison them all back in SA2, and were responsible for an unjustified massacre that they covered up for decades, one where children were murdered even. But yeah, seems a little stupid to have your characters who fight industry and militarization so willingly endorse one of the two things that they always actively stand against.
Sheesh, there always seems to be a lot of police around when you don't need them.
Where is this energy now? To be fair, I'm sure you could think of a decent justification for it in the story. Gun is the only real military presence in Sonic's world, and so they would naturally be the biggest line of defense against an alien armada, besides Sonic and his furry freedom-fighting vigilante squad. Especially in human-populated areas, it does make sense on a practical level if the crew just kinda rolls with it for the sake of fighting a common enemy. I'm just of the opinion that it's wrong for them to be so innately defensive of Gun, to the point of calling them good guys when they're, historically not, like just demonstrably not. They've raced an armored vehicle down a heavily populated area, and one can only hope that that was just property damage, and that was all to just catch Sonic, who didn't even do anything in the first place. Are these really your heroes, guys? I'm just saying. It also sucks when these gun robots are, like, necessary to homing attack for platforming, and I've got Tails in my ear screaming about how I need to cut it out. Like, listen, I am helping you steal mystical money. When did you decide to be less based? Anyway, I'm done here, so we can move on to the fourth stage of the pure hero route, Death Ruins. The Black Arms have been successfully driven into the jungle due to Shadow's efforts, but the commander still remains stubbornly unconvinced of his heroism, authorizing use of heavy weapons to hunt him down alongside the aliens. There, in the jungle, we'll meet up with Rouge, who asks us to help finish off the alien forces, about 50 enemies, alongside Gun, even though they're, currently trying to poach us like wild boars. Well, yeah, sure, why not? I'm just that nice this go-round. Doom wants us to book it to the goal ring, escaping from the forest and giving them a chance to maintain some ground. We're done listening to his requests, though. This stage is exceedingly fine. It apes a lot of the same flair from Prison Island, but it lacks the pop of that setting's industrial wasteland chic that mixed in with the jungle theme. Here we pretty much just have temple ruins and moss. There's a lot of alien growth in here as well, which is kinda neat, you know, some more goop for Shadow to bathe in.
So now you're here for the goop.
But that's pretty much it. It doesn't look bad by any means, in fact I'd say it looks pretty cool. But it's not as visually striking since it just feels like a lesser version of a stage we've already been to. The music is solid though. I'm not really sure if I have a good descriptor for it other than that the riff drives along the stage nicely and it has a decent amount of hard energy suited for all that enemy engagement, but it definitely feels like a song made to just keep your focus on the action for its midpoint, if that makes any sense. It doesn't really go anywhere past where it starts, but I will say that the upbeat tone sells that things are finally starting to pick up for humanity, the tide inching toward their favor as Shadow solidifies his intent to work against Doom. As you truck ahead, your forward momentum tends to get bogged down by all the enemy hunting here and there, but those portions are at least kept off the winding path, so there aren't too many opportunities for the long arms of the Doom to hide out in places you wouldn't think to look for them. Still wouldn't say it's got super creative implementation for the level goals, more or less just kind of serviceable. Don't hate to play it, but the longer we do this song and dance, anything less than inventive just kinda glazes over me. It shall pass. Barely. This isn't really helped by the boss that follows. Shadow first makes fun of Doom for having trouble with Gun's forces, which is admittedly pretty funny, but then Doom claims he has no intention of destroying humanity, as they'll all be a valuable resource for his ritual of prosperity tomorrow. What? Then he summons Black Bull. Again.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Second time in the same route, I guess they were just kind of running out of ideas. Outside of the arena you're stuck in, he plays exactly the same as before. He's stationary and you pop up to a grind rail in the middle of the air to attack him, which doesn't help much. You can just target him from the ground using the auto-aim anyway, so there's no point in wasting energy getting up there. He sucks just as much as he did before. Begone, foul sub-boss in tepid yet average standing within the realm of my opinion. Let us move on once again. We get that same cutscene about Sonic bringing Shadow along to the Ark, except this time, Oh boy, okay, we're gonna go through some whiplash here. First of all, Shadow steals the emerald powering the ship while he's in it.
Is he stupid?
Then he says one of the funniest lines in the game.
This is like taking candy from a baby, which is fine by me.
Who wrote this? This is way more generic in the Japanese script, by the way. Way less unnecessarily, you know the accursed word.
つくづく愚かな奴らだ。この僕の前にカオスエメラルドをさらけ出すとはな。
I mean, minus points for being far less funny, but still.
The warning siren of the ship not having a fuel source literally triggers a PTSD flashback to the day of the Ark incident, and it allows us to play a level alongside Maria, again, called Lost Impact. Okay. Lot to unpack here. I'm not even going to bother with a dissertation on the taking candy from babies line, but I will say, it's a little silly for Shadow not to know that would cause problems for him. And this scene is just in the pure hero route? Shadow stealing from Sonic and Tails for no reason? In the route where you only ever do hero stuff? Doesn't seem very heroic to me, unless those babies are just like naturally born evil. Maybe he thought Doom made one good point. Anyway, now let's talk about the level itself. Lost Impact is, bar none, the stage I have the most complicated relationship with. It is simultaneously my most loathed stage for being the worst to navigate and fight in, and probably my absolute favorite as a narrative beat to strike. Let's dissect this mental breakdown, shall we? So, this isn't the first time we've seen a flashback stage to the Ark in this video. We previously had the Doom, which was a decent bit of backstory too. What I think sets Lost Impact leagues apart is threefold. For starters, we get further insight into what was happening on the Ark here, with your hero objective being to destroy 35 artificial chaos. The artificial chaos were an enemy commonly seen throughout the Ark in Sonic Adventure 2, something that made a pretty clear implication about where some of Gerald's research led him, but was largely unspoken. Here, Maria, our companion character for the hero mission once again, confirms that they are Gerald's handiwork, and that they are based on the god of an ancient culture. Here, we have explicit confirmation that Gerald likely researched Echidna society, possibly even taking inspiration from the murals of chaos for things like and taking inspiration from the prophetic image of Supersonic from Hidden Palace for Shadow. We also just generally have an incredible space to marvel at here. I already talked in the Doom about how I love the Ark's sterile, confined aesthetic, but it's helped even more here by Maria's companion dialogue, as this person who is so close to Shadow, who we know he'll never see again after this, wistfully recounts the things they've seen and done together alongside him. She also extends her sympathies to the suffering creatures rampaging throughout the station, another sign of bad things to come, as Shadow fully immerses himself in his memory, thinking he can do the impossible and change something that's already happened. God, the music. It's this beautifully haunting soundscape scored by one of the single most emotional piano performances I think this series has ever given. It very clearly and precisely evokes the feeling of a memory long gone, something that despite our strongest desires can never be returned to. You're lingering alongside the ghost of someone precious to you, and there's a devastatingly unspoken truth hanging thick in the air, that no matter what you do, you're going to be forced to let it all go, because it's all gone. Nothing can change that now. But then there's the level itself. Oh boy. You can just navigate your way to the goal ring if you want to do the centrist mission, but as stated before, destroying 35 artificial chaos is the hero's journey. And in such a labyrinthine, samey-looking, huge-ass level, that is beyond monotonous. The worst part about it easily is how well hidden some of these guys can be when combined with the already easy to get lost in hallways and corridors. Like I said before in the Doom, these Ark stages basically have zip nada in the way of landmarks. Most of the rooms are basically identical, in fact. There are maps on the walls, but they're practically useless, and of course there's no minimap or map screen of any kind. If you think this seems like a recipe for getting hopelessly lost, especially when it comes to the turret sections where you have enemies literally spawning behind you as you pass, yeah, you'd be correct. Even with years of experience with this game under my belt, coming back and finally finishing this stage, I was struggling. Oh yeah, did I mention this stage was the one that prevented me from finishing the game as a kid? And now, as a seasoned series veteran, it still took me over 20 minutes to get through. That is horrendous. Sonic stages should never take that long, I'm sorry. At most, I start to think Sonic stages are dragging when they go on for more than like 5 to 6. Ideally, they should take a few. 20 is outrageous. And hell, don't get me started on Eggman Land or the new Tower Trials in the Frontiers DLC, woof. It sucks that this stage falls right down to the bottom of my tier list because everything makes me want to love it. I want to lavish it with praise because of how genuinely emotionally resonant it is. but it sucks to play, and for a video game, that's kind of important. At least it's over. After wrapping up that agony, we return to the present day. Shadow and Sonic are aboard the Ark when Sonic sees the black comet flying past. Having this strange sense of connection to something he doesn't remember, Shadow can tell that the Black Arm's hive mind is lying in wait on its surface, and insists they go there to finally finish all of this. This time, we're returning to the comet for good, rather than for evil, and Sonic and Shadow decide to hunt down Black Doom together. Of course, you could spontaneously decide to activate all the defense switches for Doom if you'd like to be a dick and turn back on everything you currently stand for at the last second, but we know what we're doing here. This is Final Haunt, the concluding stage of the true hero path. Let's ride through it in style, shall we? And that won't be hard, because damn is this stage stylish. I already complimented the look of this environment before, and that obviously still applies here, but the music makes for a really cool contrast. Black Comet's track was a lot more desperate and more indicative of the struggle of humanity against the Black Arms and how you were leading Shadow down a path of destruction. Final Haunt is almost chill by comparison, having that signature Sonic groove as you solidify your inevitable victory against the aliens. They're already on the back foot, humanity is rising, and Shadow is working together with Sonic & Co., who are already incredibly powerful and well-known in their own right. This gets reflected in the music itself, emphasizing how in control of the situation you are. There's no need to worry, you just have to keep going and everything will be alright in the end. Doom won't last another day. Hate sounding like a broken record, but alas, the stage itself is just alright. It drags a little, but for a final stage, I'd say that's more excusable, and it's nowhere near as long as Lost Impact was, so that's a relief. There are a few little gimmicks or challenges that I'm mixed on, but they're comparatively small potatoes. There's some mindless brawl areas to wipe, which I'm never too big of a fan of in these stages, and this gimmick of using the suction gun to pull out the retractable walls is neat on paper, but it needed to be communicated in the actual game better, because boy did it take me far too long to figure out what the hell I was supposed to be doing here. Other than that, it's yet another fairly straight shot to press on through to the other side of. Looks great, sounds great, full of action, serves its purpose pretty well, and it's nowhere near the best stage that this game has, but I feel perfectly comfortable calling it a decent closer. Now we come to see the fruits of our labors, a fight alongside Sonic with Black Doom. Shadow declares that he now remembers his promise to Maria, and will honor it by taking Doom down. Doom rather proudly declares that he could never defeat perfect beings like the Black Arms, but considering what I already went over about his boss encounter being too easy, yeah, about that. R.I.P. Bozo, you weren't any harder the second time.
No! Should have thought twice about this Hedgehog's dilemma, bitch. Dude, what are you talking about? My foot just took his ass to therapy. Is the therapy up his butt? Or is his ass itself going to therapy? Just leave it be.
In the end, Doom struggles to insist that the Black Arms will rise, but one vague death threat from Sonic later, Shadow declares that he'll use the power of the Emeralds to wipe out the aliens' forces, and thus ends the true hero route of Shadow the Hedgehog. Well, not really. I suppose I should comment on the way this can end if you decide to screw it all up. If you swerve at the last second, I kid you not, you fight against Sonic and Diablon after Shadow declares that he'll side with anyone, as long as they are against Sonic. My man was literally so annoyed by Sonic that he became evil at the last second, despite being completely good up until now. Defeating Sonic, he declares he will finally be the strongest hedgehog in the world. I guess all that playful ribbing gave him a murderous inferiority complex. And with that, Shadow ascends to something worse than cookie-cutter centrism. Libertarianism.
That's why you should watch how you flirt, Sonic. You never know how it will turn out.
Narratively, I think this route is pretty good. I can't help but feel it continues to retread a lot of ground from Shadow's previous arc from SA2, though. Kind of inevitable given the amnesia angle, but still, disappointing on that front. True to the route's name, Shadow ends up feeling like he saddles up too close to a goody two-shoes angle here, aside from his hilariously out-of-place candy-stealing line from pre-Lost Impact. And I do think going through with this path does detract a bit from what made him unique previously. Just a tad. On the other hand, I do think there is something powerful about how Doom is subverted here, which is something I want to talk more deeply about once we actually get to the final story. As a triumph for Shadow's character, this route isn't lacking in its intended effect, just seems a bit redundant in hindsight when compared to the other routes you could take him, all of which at minimum had outcomes farther away from what the audience had already seen before now. Level-wise, it's once again a bit of a mixed bag. You have stages which are perfectly inoffensive, like Westopolis, Lethal Highway, Circus Park, Death Ruins, and Final Haunt, but what's left over is Lost Impact, which I think I've made pretty clear how I feel about it. I think even with Shadow's best moral effort, I can't help thinking it ends up underwhelming. But I'm super fatigued with this structure. Need I remind you once again, you do literally have to play the game 10 times to get to the final story. And if I wasn't doing it all in a row, I'm sure it would probably be a lot more bearable. As a last hurrah before said finale though, it may not stack up, but we know it could have been far worse. It's also just always a good time when you get to listen to this route's credits theme, All Hail Shadow by Magnify. It's a corny as hell track, positively dripping with the delicious butt rock this game deserves. The guitars, the slightly hoarse-sounding vocals, the fantastically over-the-top lyrics, everything about this song just strikes right. Such a fitting send-off to Shadow's tale of daring do-goodering. I actually prefer this original version of the track to the one that would come later in Sonic 06, which is a cover by Crush 40. Don't know if that's heretical to say. Don't get me wrong, I adore Crush 40, but I always tend to prefer the original versions of songs that they cover. Same also applies to His World and Sonic Boom. Originally, the song meant to be used in this route, and indeed as the theme for the game itself, was another song by Magnify called Who I Am. And for reasons that were never made entirely clear and has been the subject of multiple rumors throughout the years, the song never made it into the final game. It was even cut pretty late if the cobbled together version of the intro featuring I Am All of Me is anything to go by, having to be considerably spliced up with the other cutscene footage to make work, which becomes self-evident when you see the original uncut intro, which was far more cohesive. Personally, I love both songs a lot, but I think Who I Am is more thematically appropriate for the game, and its lyrics are very pointedly associated with it. While not as directly made out to be a ballad for Shadow, it is undoubtedly about his character, and speaks to the power of self-actualization amidst great pressure, and external forces that try to shape you into a mold of someone else's design. This is something that would no doubt be very resonant with a lot of people when combined with the rest of the game. Again, stuff we'll have to get into later. If we have anything to be happy about when it comes to the song being cut, however, it's that we got 2 Magnify bangers for the price of 1. And of course, we got I Am All of Me, which, while it isn't my preferred song of the 2, is still forever a banger nevertheless. And I'd argue it's deeply appropriate too in some other ways, which I'll also be touching on in a bit. For now though, we have to finally wrap this whole thing up. Let's talk about—
Oh wait, right. There's multiplayer in this game. How am I supposed to play multiplayer? I don't have friends. I don't even think other people exist.
Aha! I finally found you!
Oh god, no, you can't do this to me.
Sitting pretty in your new house, huh? Forgot about me?
In my... Oh. Oh, I guess I do live in a new house, don't I?
Don't play games with me! People hate me because of you!
People hate you because of you!
What's the difference?
Okay. What seems to be the problem, oh loathed straw man?
I resent the notion that I could ever even possess conviction.
Yeah, well, you did a crap job of explaining that.
You did!
What's the difference? God, just shut up and explain why you're here to drive me nuts again. Do you seriously want to play video games with me?
With you? Ha! As if. I've got bigger fish to flambe. I just spent over a year in a Siberian prison after Reddit got me doxxed and swatted.
What did you do? Oh, right. Yeah, you existed.
It doesn't matter. I intend to take my revenge for all the thoughtless hate you made me spew. I have here with me a rusty nail, which I'll give you tetanus with before you can finish this retrospective. It's the perfect plan.
It's Ostinato!
Eh? Oh god, not you.
You aren't the first person to say this about me, and you won't be the last.
So, what's your plan? I've been practicing my judo, big guy. What are you gonna do? Complain about an anime girl until I stuff myself full of C4?
I'm going to fix something that we've wrought upon this world.
Whoa! I thought you were cool with me. You tried to save my hide from her last time, remember?
That was before you became what you were meant to chastise.
Oh no, not the stuffing! Oh god, that stuff's coming out really quick! Oh god, I need that to live! That is my lifeblood! That's my essence!
Did somebody say multiplayer?
Oh, heck yeah. Let's play it together. But, why are you here?
I live here. We're roommates. We moved in together.
Oh yeah, I guess that did happen. Well, anyway, do you want to play this?
Do I?
Oh man, this is gonna be so funny. We'll have such deep commentary, such great material.
Nothing can stop us!
Yeah, you can, yeah, I don't think you can pick up a weapon. Do you,
Man, these vehicles are just... Oh, there you are.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this is,
Yeah, I forgot there's actually very little to say about this.
Shadow the Hedgehog's multiplayer mode is just a novelty. I haven't gone super into detail about the multiplayer options in the previous Sonic games I've covered, because I didn't have friends to record with. But while they may not have been expansive, it's completely bare bones here. Instead of racing through several stages and having a battle option like in Sonic Adventure 2 or Heroes, there's just a battle mode here. No character roster either, just Shadow and a Shadow recolor versus a bunch of Shadow androids. Some of them even have specialized weapons affixed to their arms that make it to where you can't even pick up different ones in the arena. The objective's as a video game as it gets. Defeat your duplicate by any means necessary. This of course means getting them down to 0 rings and then inflicting damage on them. There's an environment to run around in, weapons to pick up, and occasionally scattered enemies to steal additional weapons or vehicles from. All of the stages felt too small or too big considering what you're allowed to do, not to mention the fact that there are only 3, count 'em, 3 stages to compete in: Gun Fortress, Air Fleet, or Lava Shelter. The music for each stage is also just Radical Highway from Sonic Adventure 2. There's no mix-up or playlist of any kind, just the one song from a game that isn't what you're playing. You can either do one match in a single stage or duke it out in a best 2 out of 3 across all of them. This is honestly not very deep, it's just as simple as it sounds, and that's... well, it could definitely be worse, but that's not a high bar to reach. For what it's worth, Austin and I had a lot of laughs playing it together, and I think it's a good enough time waster for what it is. But it isn't a mode that you would necessarily want to go out of your way to make time for with friends on a regular basis. I even deliberately ran around the stage just to extend the matches and make them more fun, because it's pretty easy to quickly find and attack your opponent at the start of a match. And when the two of you are going guns blazing in the same area, those matches end incredibly quickly. It is by all accounts a tacked-on bonus that's only present for the sake of saying the game has multiplayer. This isn't your only option when it comes to having fun with friends though, in theory. The game also allows someone with a second controller to take control of Shadow's companion characters in the main game, similarly to how you could do with Tails in Sonic 2 or 3 on Genesis. Similar to the co-op in those games though, it has a problem: the camera. The camera only follows player 1, and there's no split screen to speak of available. This means the second player is inevitably going to get off-screened every second. In addition, all the companion characters can do while they're being controlled is your standard homing attack and the flimsy punches and kicks. They can't obtain weapons, use vehicles, or even spawn alongside you. Needless to say, playing the game like this isn't going to be worth the trouble of inching along just to make sure the second player can feel involved. And if you're doing the dark missions, you just have Doom's Eye, so nothing for a buddy to really do there. This means that if you want to run dark missions with a friend, you'll have to use the hero character selected, thereby removing the dark objective from the screen and keeping track of your progress manually. Although, I have to say, it was really funny to get Austin controlling Sonic and Westopolis to complete the dark objective. Seeing Sonic casually dunk on the gun soldiers until suddenly Black Doom pops up congratulating Shadow for a job well done, all while Sonic's voice clips are commanding Shadow to stop, was the best kind of confusingly hilarious that only this game could make possible. We even got Omega to help Dr. Eggman in Lava Shelter. I don't even think the Gun Commander's cognitive dissonance runs that deep. And of course, who could forget Maria's legendary bitch slap? Go off, Queen!
It's too bad I don't have any weapons to make this really specific joke.
What's that?
Tails attacking the president's shuttle.
Yeah, that would be great. Oh, man.
Oh, yeah.
What a silly game.
Good times. While they lasted. And how am I going to pay rent like this?
Do you understand? I think you do. Understand what? Retrospect. What it means. To look back? Yes. That's not all you do. You look forward too. You may remember something being bad, but you recognize the good. The things you may not have seen before, may not have wanted to see. It's not that you have no cynicism, but you retain some warmth. It's good to remember why you cared at all. Plus that annoying bear is gone. The bit we made didn't really work out. Retiring him while poking fun at myself felt like the best way to go. Sincerity. Still haven't told me who you are. I have faith that you'll see that shortly.
A true ending it is. Let's move on with the final story.
So, 10 playthroughs later, has Shadow the Hedgehog been worth it so far? Well, that's a tough call. It largely hasn't been a great experience, but what I do find interesting about it is good or at least passable enough that writing it off entirely is a mistake. Of course, maybe I'd feel different if I went out of my way to get all 300 plus possible variants of the library modes entries, but you only need 10 for the final story to unlock, so...
Okay, fine, I yield. I mean, you people like long-form content, that's why you're here. So let's just give this one more try from the top. Let's start at Route 11, Westopolis.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just did something quick.
Right, yeah.
Why do we have all this sauce up here? Teriyaki. Oh, it's down here. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I just needed the, the... What?
Oh god, this red really sticks. Ugh. Is that the only color we have? Shit. We need more code red.
Never mind, final story it is. We pick up once again with the newspaper about the Black Comet, but shit is looking bleak. Shadow is on the comet itself, the exact path he took to get here being somewhat unclear, but presumably hero adjacent. Having now collected all of the Chaos Emeralds, he's finally ready to learn about his past. Just then, Sonic's group along with Dr. Eggman arrive at the same time as Black Doom. Both parties vie for the emeralds, demanding Shadow to hand them over. Doom denies an intent to destroy the world, instead saying that because of humanity's foolish tendency to cheat, compete, and fight over trivial things, he's basically going to turn them into loyal domestic pets for the Black Arms. The lucky ones turned into obedient drones, while the rest are turned into nourishment. With this revelation out in the open, Doom steals the emeralds from Shadow, using a supercharged chaos control to warp the Black Comet close to the planet's surface, since it could never naturally break the Earth's atmosphere, at which point it grafts itself to the planet with horrifying tendrils and starts emitting a nerve-freezing neurotoxin. Doom isn't done handing out surprises either, revealing that apparently Professor Gerald Robotnik willingly helped with this gambit. In exchange for Black Doom's DNA, which he felt he needed to complete Shadow, Gerald promised the Black Arms that Shadow would deliver the emeralds to them in 50 years' time, when the Black Comet returned to the Earth. Even Eggman is baffled by this, and Sonic & Co. are ready to fight. Unfortunately for them, the nerve gas emitting from the comet paralyzes them all.
So, the animators can stop working with them.
As strange larval aliens approach them, ready to feast on their flesh, Shadow remembers the many things people have said to him across the game. It's funny, really, for a game designed with the idea of choice in mind, advertised as one where you can decide Shadow's alignment and fate, Shadow has very sparsely ever had much of a choice throughout this narrative. He's constantly being told what to do, where to go, and what to think. Doom demands the emeralds from him for domination, while Sonic wants them so he can go super and save the world as per usual. But because of all of this, it's somewhat poignant in my mind that here and now, Shadow's done taking orders.
Hedgehog. 一切の過去を捨てた男。誰のためでもなく何にとらわれるでもない。自らの意志で目障りな貴様を消す。
貴様を生み出してやったこの我に逆らうというのか。面白い。貴様ごときに何ができるのか。じっくりと見物させてもらおう。
Wait, hold on, don't just leave them there. This leads us to the final stage of the game, another Black Comet-themed level titled The Last Way. And while it's not exactly a new aesthetic tour de force, The Last Way makes for an okay final level. As is the time-honored tradition of a 3D Sonic game's end stage, all your friends are cheering you on over a radio, as you descend into the comet's core to locate Doom and stop him in his tracks. Hordes of Black Arms forces try to stop you in your tracks, which means you'll be quickly filling your hero gauge while fighting them. This is a convenient thing, because the main gimmick of this stage is, in fact, your ability to not play it. Yeah, remember how I talked before about chaos control, and how it wasn't very applicable to any stages but the centrist ones because of how it zips you right past your objectives? Well, they kinda made use out of that oversight at the last second. In this stage, there are completely impassable walls and a time limit at play, both being mitigated only by your ability to constantly build up your hero gauge and use chaos control, which cuts down on the long level and is able to zip you past the barriers blocking your way. It's certainly an interesting application of the ability, even if it's just like a band-aid on a larger issue. Aside from that, I struggle to feel like The Last Way isn't underwhelming in all the same ways the levels like it have been. It's practically indistinguishable in design from the other Black Comet stages, even feeling at times like you're just repeating sections from them. The music is also fine, but meant to be more of a score rather than something that gets stuck in your head or especially evocative. Like, yeah, it's triumphant, that's true, but that's all there is to it. There's also this pit with mines over them that drove me nuts. Like, who decided this was okay? You know what, forget it. Before you know it, once you've fought through the many waves, you make your way to Black Doom, with one of the single most hilarious victory screens I've ever seen. Why is he so close to the camera? We've built up to a properly climactic showdown. Shadow vows to take Doom down for good, as Doom laments that Shadow is sadly no different from the fools he wishes to control. Declaring that because Shadow shares his blood, Doom puppets him to the floor forcibly, saying that he will never escape the past.
Now you see that evil will always triumph, because good is dumb.
At the same time, we rejoin Team Chaotix on the Space Colony Ark, who have been working this entire time, as you may recall, to obtain some top-secret hidden information related to Shadow and held in part by Gunn at Prison Island. We're finally gonna get a payoff for what that was now. As SBO debates how exactly to quickly broadcast this information to Shadow, Charmy just rams into the terminal, somehow getting the signal to work as the video is transmitted to the Black Comet.
Because, you know, Black Doom just has a lot of 16K TVs lying around for some reason. We know the reason.
A video of Gerald from the past relays to Shadow that sweet, sweet retroactive continuity truth. While he certainly did work with Doom to complete Project Shadow, it was purely out of desperation, something he regarded as a mistake. To correct his actions, he entrusted Shadow with a contingency plan he formed, back when he was still a little saner and Maria was still alive. Said contingency was not only building a secret backdoor resistance to Doom's mind control inside of him, but also the preparation of the Eclipse Cannon, which was intended for Shadow to use so he could destroy the Black Comet when Doom eventually returned to Earth. The Professor never intended to honor their deal at all. Now keen to his purpose, Shadow rises to his feet, intent on settling this once and for all. Doom vanishes into the air, announcing that if Shadow wants to leave the past behind so badly, that he'll destroy his past and future. But that's the thing about retrospect, isn't it? You take the good with the bad, the past with the future. Maybe this game isn't what I needed it to be back then. Maybe it isn't even entirely what I wanted now. But I think I know what it's getting at. And I think I can put all of that, all of those lessons, to good use.
You've lived and learned.
That we have. Now let's go. We've dropped into the final boss encounter, Devil Doom. With the entire planet in peril, everyone compromised to the nerve gas except for Shadow, and the world below being torn asunder by a red whirlwind of debris as the comet sinks further into the Earth, we're running on limited time to defeat this thing. What exactly it is isn't explicitly addressed. Whether this form is something Doom was always capable of taking, or more like a super transformation since he nabbed the Chaos Emeralds, is never clarified. Even with no explanation, it's a metal-ass design. A two-headed winged monstrosity with spider pinchers, giant devil wings, and skin grafted amorphously to something that looks like the comet itself. As always, Super Shadow can fly around, but he has to continuously gather rings as your counter ticks down, or else he'll lose his form and fall out of the sky, and we don't want a repeat of that. We can speed boost around with the jump button and use the attack button to fire off Chaos Spears, with the attacks being stronger the longer we hold it down. Destroying debris fills the Dark meter, while destroying meteors fills the Hero meter. This means both Chaos Blast and Chaos Control can be used to your advantage in this fight as well. The boss's weak point is Doom's single eye, which has the ability to switch back and forth between his two heads to avoid you. Hey, looks like all that Black Bull training's finally paying off. All you have to do if you notice the head you're facing doesn't have the eye is fly around to the other side and attack him there. This boss is rather infamous for having an important piece of info hidden pretty deep within it as well. You see, if you spend at least 10 minutes in the fight, Eggman finally makes a confession to Shadow.
Shadow, can you hear me? This might be the last chance I have to speak to you, so what I said about having created you, it was all a lie. Everyone thought you died during that horrible incident, but I rescued you with one of my robots. You lost your memory, that's all. You really are the ultimate life form my grandfather created.
So yeah, Shadow is the original Shadow from SA2. No idea why they'd set up that question and let it be a driving force of the plot if this was the only place they were going to drop the answer, because I'll be honest with you, this boss, like many other final bosses in 3D Sonic history, is not difficult. Even I, who had a bit of trouble with it since I'd never played it before and didn't know what to expect from how it felt, cleared the encounter in less time than I would have needed to spend in it to get this line to trigger. So that's how you know they should have, maybe lowered the limit, or better yet, let it play regardless. Either way, Devil Doom is grand in appearance, and once again, the music hits, seeing as they play the full version of I Am All of Me here. Again, I think Who I Am fits a bit better for the tone of the encounter, but that's just me. The progression of the fight makes good use of all of your abilities, and even incorporates the gunplay by modeling the Chaos Spears off of how the firearms control, which I think is a pretty nice, well-considered touch. But after a shorter than planned back and forth with this Dante's Inferno fan character, Doom is donezo, declaring himself the ultimate lifeform in a desperate attempt to seem in control, before plummeting to his death to the earth below, mirroring Shadow's apparent demise in SA2, and firmly sealing his past where it belongs, in the past. Shadow then uses all of his remaining strength to utilize the last of his Chaos Control, and warp the Black Comet into the path of the Eclipse Cannon, blowing it to pieces and ridding the world of the Black Arms forever. Everyone cheers below as Eggman tries to sneak away before getting chased down by Knuckles. The gun soldiers celebrate as they're once again saved by Shadow, and the president commiserates with the commander, saying that they made a serious error in condemning Gerald regarding what happened with him during the Ark incident as a mistake, and vowing to work together to ensure a brighter, hopefully atrocity-free future. Shadow then mirrors the final shot of Sonic Adventure 2, with Sonic leaving the Ark and saying goodbye to him, by letting go of a photo of Maria and Gerald, saying those exact same words. Adios, Shadow the Hedgehog. And with that, the final story of Shadow the Hedgehog comes to its close. And what a finale. I'm obviously not the biggest fan of certain aspects, but I think it pulls this game together cohesively, and doesn't get the credit I think it's owed. There are a few primary criticisms I hear about how the final story plays out, and I'd like to address them here. Foremost, there's the idea that since this is the canonical ending, all of the other variant paths have no point, and it deprives players of an actual choice in the matter, like was advertised. I don't really agree with this, though. To me, all of these paths felt perfectly plausible considering the opening premise of Shadow's amnesia. Him realizing his good qualities yet again? Yeah, seems fair. Him being manipulated into either doing great evil or believing himself to be something he's not? Also believable. The point here isn't for us to necessarily choose Shadow's definitive destiny, because I don't believe there's really any way to account for that if he was going to continue being a recurring character in the franchise. Sega wasn't going to account for every individual version of Shadow people made in this game in the future. This was more about the idea that Shadow has all of these conflicting emotions and sides within himself, just like anyone does. It's not that Shadow is pure good, pure evil, or even anything in particular taken from those endings, just that he has the tendency, the precedent for either persuasion, and it's this dichotomy, this struggle that makes Shadow's arc what it is, a story of dealing with the turmoil and anger inside of yourself and either succumbing to it or finding a way out with the help of others. What's canon here isn't all that matters. Through experiencing all of these flavors of Shadow, we can finally see him through to his final destination, an ending informed by his experiences, whether he canonically had all of them or not, that informed us about what he was capable of, what he felt, and what he should do. Here and now, Shadow is no longer taking orders or particularly forceful suggestions from anyone. He does want to continue honoring Gerald's wishes for him and his promise with Maria, but he's doing this on his own terms and for himself. Shadow has bonds with Sonic & Co., but he'll subvert them if he has to. Shadow has a lingering resentment toward humanity, but he can still realize that their world is worth protecting. It's just like the song says, I am all of me. The black-hearted evil and brave-hearted hero reside in the same person, a duality of nature. This actually reminds me of an official Sonic Channel comic about Shadow, revealing why he was named the way he was. It was Maria who suggested the name. Gerald rightfully wondered if the name Shadow made him sound like a villain, a reaction anyone would think of. But in her kindness, Maria saw it differently, and explained, darkness is darkness, no matter where it goes, but a shadow shows the way to the light. There's also the matter of the retconning. Some people just generally dislike the Black Arms for existing at all, thinking their presence diminishes Shadow's story by suddenly introducing this rogue element of cartoonily evil aliens for no reason other than laziness. I can agree that the inclusion of aliens has always been something that sat strangely with me, and it does feel a bit like a cop-out. But even with that, their presence doesn't diminish that much of the story. Gunn is still wrong about Gerald, for the most part, and still did absolute atrocities in response. And in the process, I think this adds a little more nuance to Gerald's character. A lot of people think it's weird for the president to commend him so much at the end, saying it's like he forgot Gerald went on to devise a plan to destroy the Earth after Maria was killed, but this isn't what I got from it at all. We see Maria is still alive in the tape that the Chaotix broadcast, after all. I think what's getting across here is more that the atrocity itself leading to Gerald's spiral is the mistake the president regrets, and he wants to honor Gerald and the victims of the Ark for the persecution they unjustly went through, since Gerald's plan did ensure the Earth's safety in the long run despite his mistakes both prior and afterward. This also creates a good explanation for why the Eclipse canon ever existed at all, in my opinion. It was one of the hanging threads from SA2 that people questioned when it came to reconciling Gerald's good nature pre-Ark incident. If he really was such a nice guy, why'd he build a giant death laser capable of wiping out the planet? Well, he made it to destroy the Black Comet initially, but had Shadow repurpose it later after tampering with his mind once he went off the deep end. See? Continuity issue solved. One could even take him wanting to destroy the planet as a secondary middle finger to Doom, as the planet he sought to conquer would be gone by the time he arrived. Or at the very least, if nobody ever discovered Shadow, the Black Arms would just arrive and ruin things anyway, so his goal probably would have been accomplished either way in a sense. The final story is just the best outcome that could have been arrived at from all of these circumstances. Some people also take issue with Team Chaotix conveniently stumbling on Gerald's video, apparently, but as previously established, they already had it. They had been gathering the data all throughout the game, both in Prison Island and in Mad Matrix, and Vector was looking for the computer room of the Ark to broadcast it back in Cosmic Fall. Charmy doesn't just happen upon it when they're standing in the Ark, he messes with the computer while they're trying to broadcast the video itself, which they already have, and happens to hit the right thing to make it do so. Is that a bit convenient? Sure, like I said, it's kinda silly that these screens appear in the Black Comet at all, but it's not terribly contrived. Makes about as much sense as the somehow projecting a bunch of Gerald's execution tapes out of its skin.
I think that's a medical issue, but I struggle to describe which one.
This all strikes the right balance it needs to maintain thematically. Some of the animation is goofy, of course, but the core of it, the message, the character arcs, all of that worked out really well, I think. Not perfectly, but still very nicely. Really, the weakest parts of the final story are, as it constantly has been, the gameplay. The Last Way is a C-ranker at best, and the fight with Devil Doom, while cool, is still messy and easy when you really get down to brass tacks. But the actual ending is incredibly satisfying, and even if you hate the rest of the story, you have to admit that the final message is at least evocative. We're not shackled to our pasts, we're not solely defined by them. We can make mistakes or have things in our nature that seem irreconcilable, can make us feel like monsters. But it's not as if we can never start anew, or are ever beholden to one option. We can look forward, leave our baggage behind, and make a concentrated effort to be better, more holistic people. We don't need to abandon the different, sometimes complicated aspects of who we are to make a whole, because we are all of us. The good, the bad, and the in-between. We can fall into Shadow and then use it as a guide to find the light again. And that's why, despite everything, I really like the last story of Shadow the Hedgehog. It's how I started to recognize once again why I cared about this game. Shadow the Hedgehog is far from perfect. It's janky, it's cheesy, it's tonally inconsistent, it's poorly stitched together, it's chasing trends, it's sloppily designed, and yeah, maybe it's a little cringe. But cringe can be valuable. Cringe can also be art. It's never my place to insist otherwise. This game resonated with me in some ways I didn't expect, and I'm sure it resonated even more sincerely with a lot of kids coming up. I was actually talking to a friend about the game recently, and what he said about its story actually really struck a chord with me, and gave me some further insight about what it actually means. The goofiness of Shadow the Hedgehog is really good, because it keeps it palatable to the late child audience. For as silly as Shadow the Hedgehog is, it's never condescending, as opposed to so much media for kids. Shadow the Hedgehog came out in 2005. Like, nowadays divorce is more common and socially acceptable, but back then everyone's parents were getting divorced, but every news outlet was making you feel like a freak for it, or for being an abuse victim. I think Shadow the Hedgehog speaks to those kids the most. I mean, Black Doom is an absent dad who shows up and showers Shadow in praise, and then makes demands of him, and Shadow is torn between two sides. A lot of children of divorce or abuse really resonate with it, and it uses childish language, but never downplays his very real hurt. Doom is Shadow's abusive father, saying his adoptive or found family is not his real family. Wild. And I mean, damn, yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? I'd said before that Doom evoked that feeling in me, somebody willing to cut down and manipulate Shadow, taking advantage of his traumatic experiences for his own purposes, willingly berating him when he's at his most vulnerable, whether he's obedient or not. Shadow is a character who's deeply tied to his experiences, and especially his myriad of bad ones. In a sense, this is plainly analogous to the things those of us who endured that darkness as children, before we were old enough to know how to deal with it, had to figure out. It can feel easy to seem defined by those experiences, sculpted from that hurt, and not being able to see yourself outside of it. It can be easy to convince yourself you're not even a person, to accept yourself as the monster people will see you as, or strive to our own detriment to punish ourselves for not being what other people want from us. But all of that pain, while good to acknowledge, cannot be carried like a ball and chain on our ankle. It's something we have to confront, to feel, and to ultimately escape from. Because our origins don't matter. We're not just one thing. We are never locked into one path. We can take whichever one we want for ourselves. But a future without what we know isn't predictable. Pain can become familiar, a paradoxical comfort, something we stay shackled to because it's what we're used to. And change of any variety can be scary. Writing this video has felt like an enormous undertaking for me, because even though it's shorter than some of my others, it's something I've struggled with when it comes to wording all of this. When I cheekily announced the sub-goal for this video back when I first conceived of it, I didn't think I'd have nearly this much to say, and I was convinced for certain that very little of it would be good. Now, it's a lot more complicated. I think through my own experiences, my own time to grow, and my own need to reflect on what I've accomplished and what I feel I've made missteps on, my feelings have evolved, because that's the thing about looking back. You can always see the good, but you also see the cracks, the pitfalls, the things you wish desperately that you had done differently. I too have left behind some familiar comforts, and Shadow is the same way. A character once defined solely by his backstory, he's left behind the familiarity of that pain, self-actualized in a way that doesn't deny those experiences, but builds upon them for himself. And I think that's really powerful. No matter what we've gone through or where we come from, we can make a future for ourselves without turning back. So I'll say it once again. Shadow the Hedgehog is not a perfect game. Most of the time I'd struggle to say it's even a particularly good one. It has some questionable game mechanics, poorly conceived gimmicks, alienating stage design, a sometimes goofy story, and a mission structure that makes me want to find a way to bite my own face off. But it also has some genuinely cool aesthetic sensibilities, engaging music, serious acting talent debuting for the first time in these games, actually fantastic stage concepts in their own right, and above all, a resonant character arc for Shadow, which, while maybe dragged down by the game's presentation, still manages to stand tall and provide catharsis, both as an outlet for those of us who really need one, and as a part of this franchise's story itself. I didn't even have time to get into absolutely everything either. Like I said, there's over 300 story combinations in the library mode. There are secret doors for shortcuts and items you can unlock with keys in each stage. There are cool specialty weapons you can unlock after each route, including the Billy Hatcher and Omo Chow guns, which are genuinely hilarious. And there's even a challenge mode where you go through all of the stages on one continue and get some extra dialogue, including a pretty sweet one from the commander of all characters.
Shadow, do you read me? First, I want to apologize for the other day. Actually, I just became a grandfather last week, and I was thinking of maybe having you over. I know that training is tough, but try and do your best. Good luck.
This game deserves to be looked back on with sincerity, as more than just a one-note failure. With sincerity, with retrospect, we can learn where we need to go in the future. we can remember the good and the bad together. And even if it's more of one than the other, there is still something substantive to be found, a lesson worth taking away. Even in the most sloppily put together products, you can always find something like that. I didn't just want to crap on this game, even though I think a lot, if not most people, would have accepted that, because I think I want to do this more often. I want to point out problems where I see them, of course, but I want to see the value and the artistic intent in the things that I care about. I think even if it doesn't get that treatment all the time, this game deserved getting it at least once. I do know who you are. You're me.
Yes, we finally finished what I could. Good job.
I think we finally got something out of this after all. It may have taken a long time, but worth the $60?
Well, that's still a lot for this, but maybe so.
Wouldn't buy it for that much again, though. Nah. Well, guess it's time to leave you behind now, huh? You got a Kramer's life to live.
Since never turned out.
Nope. Never again.
I feel like I just had like a spiritual experience of some kind. I see now the good and the bad and the bad and the good. I get it! Austin!
Yeah?
I think Shadow the Hedgehog has worth despite its flaws.
Cool.
What do you think about it?
I just kind of think it sucks.
Fair enough.
We kid. We like to have a laugh or two around here, but what's no laughing matter is that you decided to watch this whole video. Thanks so much for that. This one was a long time coming, obviously, so I wanted to make it really special, and it turned out it just so happened to land around a pretty special time in my life, too. I try not to get too sappy about this game, but you can only do so much when it's me. I have a tendency towards schmaltz, what can I say? It's for that reason that before I get to the standard YouTube stuff, I want to make an announcement and give a big thank you to you all as well. I wouldn't have ever dreamed of being able to move out with friends if it weren't for your support for this channel. I'm extremely humbled by all the love and positivity I've gotten over the years, and I hope to continue improving and providing you guys with stuff we'll both enjoy, as long as you'll have me. Whether big or small, a comment, a subscription, or even patronage, you've all been a part of making this channel what it is, and I'll never be able to express my gratitude for that enough. Thank you. Maybe we'll get to Sonic 06 around the, 150k mark or something, yeah? As for that announcement, I've been thinking for a while that my lovely channel mascot probably needs to be swapped out for something a bit more representative of me. I love her to pieces, don't get me wrong, and she'll definitely still be around in some capacity for my Sonic content. But the right thing to do to reflect how the channel and its subject matter has broadened felt like making something new to usher in this new era of my life, and the channel at large. So here it is. This design of mine was lovingly rendered by the fantastically talented Frances, aka Jellyfish Fortuna on Twitter. Please check her work out, it's great stuff. This one will be making its mark on the channel shortly after this video finishes premiering, though obviously the channel name will be staying the same as it ever was. As for good old Marcy the Hedgehog, we've had some great memories together, and right now I'm showing a lot of the fantastic fan art I've gotten of her over time to show my appreciation for how much love everyone has shared toward her. Thank you so much for that. Another thanks is in order, of course, to the artists who helped me give her final appearance as the main channel mascot some fitting bombast. The thumbnail art was done by the absolute legend himself, Archie and IDW Sonic comic artist Tracy Yardley, whose work you should absolutely check out if you haven't already. His tenure with Sonic is long and full of incredibly memorable art. This awesome super transformation art of her alongside Super Shadow was also done by one of my favorite Sonic fan artists, Mar, aka _Motobug on Twitter, whose style I can't quite get enough of. And once again, a thanks for script punch-ups, cameo appearances, and camera help to my good old housemate Ostinato, whose webcomic you should absolutely check out if you haven't already. Hey, helps pay my bills too, you know? Speaking of bills, I guess it's time for the typical YouTube stuff because I sure would like to keep on top of those. Please consider leaving a comment to endear me to the ever-abrasive tide of the YouTube algorithm, subscribe and ring the bell if you haven't already to keep up to date with what I'm doing in the future, and of course, feel free to directly support me if you'd like, whether through a Patreon subscription for which you'll get sweet perks, a Ko-fi or YouTube comment donation for something a little more one-time, or clicking the join button underneath the video to become a channel member, for which you'll get some sweet specialized channel emojis. You can also check out my second channel, Super NezumiVA, linked below, to see some behind-the-scenes content and future experience videos, like the Spider-Man 3 one we just recently did. Those will be moving over there from now on, so sub to it if you want to see more of those. And now, allow me to thank some of those generous contributors, such as Serena Midori, Shogun DX, Friend of Dracula, Ali Oliver, Claire Meeboon, Noelle Hadley, Evanisha, Joseph Adams, Wecon, MJL, Lord Omega 12, No Depop, JS250476, KDoc1, Voidlich, William Jones, and Lei Pham. And that's all from me for now, but don't worry, big plans loom over the horizon. Next time, we're going to be taking a small diversion before our trusty lawyers return, into a sleepy town where the law will never save you. That's right, Silent Hill for the PS1. See you there, peace.